Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Was Guardian to Eri. Now before starting, please give this video a like, and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Well, here it is. Izuku Midoriya said to the 6-year-old girl who was holding his right hand, "Your new home." It had been 4 weeks since Eri's rescue from the 8 precepts of death. After all the heroes had recovered from the battle, the big question that came up among the teachers was what to do with Eri. After about an hour of thorough deliberation, everyone agreed that she should stay at UA in order to keep her safe from any possible future attacks. However, this posed another question: where should she stay? Many teachers offered to let her stay with them. Even Mirio offered to let her stay with him and the other big 3 members. However, during her time in the infirmary, the headmaster noticed that Eri was the most calm and happy whenever Midoriya came to visit her. He then decided that for the time being, Eri would live with Class 2A, Midoriya acting as her temporary guardian. Eri looked up at Class 2A's dormitory and was immediately overwhelmed by the sheer size of it. The build was 5 stories tall and stood proud, a glistening tower of brick and glass. It was completely different from the gloomy, dark, and secluded quarters she was used to. At a small tug on her hand, she walked with Midoriya toward the glass door leading into the dormitory and to her new life. As soon as she entered the building, the first thing she saw was a kitchen. There was a refrigerator, a stove, a sink, a microwave, and other appliances that she knew existed, but had never used before herself. Sitting around a table almost as long as the room itself was a group of people around the same age as Midoriya. Some looked like ordinary people while others had certain features that made them stand out from the others. As soon as they saw her and Midoriya, they all rose from their chairs, standing awkwardly for a second. Suddenly, a girl with pink hair and pink skin rushed forward toward Eri, bending a bit to Eri's height and with a huge smile on her face. "Well, aren't you just the cutest thing?" she exclaimed. This sudden move scared Eri and she hid behind Midoriya's legs and sobbed softly into them. "Mina." She peeked an eye around the fabric in her hands to realize this was coming from a floating set of clothes. "You scared her." Eri buried her face deeper into Midoriya's legs. "It's okay, Eri. We're Deku's friends." Eri loosened her grip on Midoriya's pant legs just a little, the soft, friendly voice making her curious. She peeked out from behind Midoriya to see a girl with chestnut hair and rosy cheeks kneeling a few feet away, holding out her hand. As Eri looked at her, she could have sworn the girl looked vaguely familiar. "We won't hurt you," the girl said reassuringly. "We promise." Slowly and after a few moments of thought, Eri decided to make her way towards the girl, stepping hesitantly until she placed her hand in the brunette's. The girl's hand was soft and smooth, which gave Eri a strange sense of relief and calm. The girl pulled a handkerchief out of her pocket and gently dabbed the tears from Eri's face. There, she said softly, still smiling reassuringly. "It's all right. My name's IzuOcha, by the way." Slowly, she stood up and held out her hand. "Would you like to meet everyone else?" Eri glanced behind IzuOcha, biting her lip as her eyebrows furrowed. Quickly, as if the sight of them burned, her eyes flew to the ground between them. A tiny shake of her head was all the response she gave. "That's okay. Maybe later," IzuOcha said, telling her classmates just as much as she was telling Eri. "Would you like to see the rest of your new home?" Eri nodded and took IzuOcha's hand. They made their way up a flight of stairs, Midoriya following right behind them. As they continued, Eri remembered where she had seen IzuOcha before. She was the girl who had helped Midoriya defeat Chisaki and then rescue her. When she realized this, Eri smiled a little at IzuOcha, who returned it in kind. Soon, the 3 of them stopped in front of an unassuming wooden door. Midoriya turned the knob and opened it to reveal a room that was filled to the brim with action figures, posters, bed sheets, and pictures of a muscular man with blonde hair and a huge smile. "This is your room. You'll be sharing it with me," Midoriya said as IzuOcha, and Eri walked inside to look around. Eri then noticed a little bed that had blankets, a comforter, and a nice fluffy pillow on the opposite side of the room from the bed that was obviously Midoriya. "And that is your bed," Midoriya said when he noticed her looking at it questioningly. Eri then looked up at one of the posters with the blonde man. She pointed at it and asked, "Grandpa Might?" Both Midoriya and IzuOcha felt their hearts skip a few beats at how cute she was. To them, hearing this 6-year-old calling All Might Grandpa Might was too adorable. "Yes, Eri," Midoriya smiled. "That's Grandpa Might." Eri's gaze then moved to the wooden dresser. Following her gaze, IzuOcha opened up the bottom drawer. It was filled with t-shirts, shorts, pants, undies, dresses, and a whole array of other clothing, all Eri's size. Eri's eyes widened at the sight. "While you were in the hospital, the other girls and I went out shopping to get you some new clothes," IzuOcha said with a smile. "Figured you'd want to wear something different than that old rag. Here," she said, pulling out a purple tank top. "Let's try this one on. I'll just go ahead and..." "Ha," Midoriya squeaked as he started turning pink and pointing at the door. As he left the room and closed the door to give the 2 girls some privacy, he leaned against the wall and couldn't help but think about Mirio and Sir Nightai. Mirio, the hero who wanted to reach for the stars and be as great as All Might. The hero who saw Midoriya as a little brother and saw potential in him to be a great hero. The hero who sacrificed his hopes, dreams, and powers in order to protect Eri from Overhaul and his gang. Midoriya could still remember his words as he sat in his hospital bed. "The point is, I'm just fine. I've got Night Eye's foresight on my side," he said with his signature smile. "So just smile already, would ya, Sir Night Eye?" he thought. Looking back, Midoriya couldn't help but feel a pang in his heart for the hero. The man died trying to protect Midoriya and Eri from Overhaul. He was the hero who, at first, had felt that Midoriya was unworthy of handling One for All and that All Might should have given it to Mirio. In the end, however, he accepted Midoriya as the one who would bring great changes to the world with his quirk. "Keep smiling," Midoriya could still hear him say as he lay on his deathbed. "Society needs smiles, laughs, and energy to bring about a brighter future." Midoriya couldn't help but smile himself at the memory of those two men, after everything they did for him and Eri. He figured that raising her and following his dream was the least he could do for his fellow intern and his former supervisor. At that moment, the door to his room opened slightly to reveal IzuOcha with a huge smile on her face. "We're ready," she said. Midoriya walked in and didn't have to fake the huge smile that covered his face at what he saw. Eri was now wearing the purple tank top over a white shirt. She was also wearing purple pants and black shoes that had been polished and shined. Midoriya picked up his mirror and pivoted it so that she could get a view of her new outfit. "So, what do you think?" he asked as he got down on his knees behind her. For a few seconds, there was absolute silence as Eri looked at herself in the mirror. "Eri?" Midoriya asked in concern when she didn't say anything. Just then, Eri ducked her head and started sobbing. "Eri," IzuOcha said nervously. If you don't like it, we can return." She didn't get a chance to finish her sentence, because at that moment, Eri had wrapped each arm around Midoriya's and IzuOcha's necks and continued to sob into their shoulders. "TT thank you," she said between sobs. "TT thank you BB both so much." Midoriya and IzuOcha both looked at her, smiled softly, and wrapped an arm around her to comfort her. They stayed like this for what seemed like an eternity, until they were certain that Eri had stopped crying. IzuOcha then took out her kerchief and dabbed at Eri's eyes to wipe away her tears. "Now then," she said as she and Midoriya stood up and each extended a hand to Eri. "Want to meet the rest of the students?" Eri nodded vigorously and, taking both hands, walked down to the living room with the two friends by her sides. "Ah, there you three are," Ada said as he and the rest of Class 2 noticed Midoriya, IzuOcha, and Eri coming down the stairs. Upon seeing Eri in her new clothes, many of the girls complimented her, saying how pretty she looked, to which she smiled and giggled. Eri, IzuOcha, and Midoriya then sat down on the couch as the chatter died down. "We were just discussing some new rules that must be established now that Eri will be staying with us," Ada said. "So far, we have decided that all of us will assist in taking care of her and teach her various things, such as table manners, how to handle being out in crowds, how to dress, etc. In terms of where she will sleep, it has already been confirmed that she will stay in Midoriya's room as he is her temporary guardian." At this, Midoriya and IzuOcha both nodded their approval. "I believe the next step is to create some rules. First, no perverted actions or words are to be used around Eri." He took a moment to shoot a glance at Minta, the class pervert. "Oh sure," Minta said annoyingly, "like I'm the one who's going to scar her for life." Second, Ada said as though he didn't hear Minta, "No profanities or curse words are to be said when Eri is in the same room." "You hear that, Bakugou?" Kaminari asked, shooting a smug grin at the explosion user. "Gotta cut back on the swearing for Eri." "You shut your foo," Bakugou shouted, but stopped when he saw Eri looking at him. "Your foo-foo fudging mouth, Kaminari," Bakugou finished, struggling to get the words out through his clenched teeth. "Oh, this is going to be good," Kaminari thought with delight. Third, no antagonizing someone just so they slip up and curse in front of Eri. Ada said. "Well, there goes the fun in the second rule," Kaminari said sadly, while Bakugou returned the smug grin. And finally, Ada concluded, "We must be sure to spend some time with Eri. We may be training to be heroes, but we also have to remember that Eri will need someone to play with her and teach her to have fun." Everyone agree on these rules. All the students nodded their heads in agreement. All of these rules seemed fair and reasonable. The rest of the day consisted of teaching Eri manners like eating properly, saying please and thank you, and asking politely for what she wanted. To everyone's surprise, Eri turned out to be an extremely fast learner. After being taught how to use a fork, spoon, and knife to eat her food instead of eating with her hands, she immediately picked up on it. Soon, the clock in the living room read 8 o'clock at night. Eri suddenly yawned. "Guess it's time for you to go to bed," Midoriya said as he lifted Eri up and began to carry her up the stairs to his bedroom. IzuOcha soon followed behind them, the rest of the class waving goodnight. When they reached Midoriya's room, he led Eri and IzuOcha in and closed the door to give IzuOcha time to change. When they were finished, Eri was in a simple pink nightgown. IzuOcha then took her to the bathroom to help her brush her teeth. Soon, Eri was nestled in her little bed with Midoriya and IzuOcha kneeling down next to her. "We got you this little nightlight," IzuOcha said as she showed Eri a nightlight that had stars engraved into it. "That way," she continued, "if you ever need to get up at night or have trouble sleeping, the light will always be there to either guide or calm you." Eri just sat in her bed silently, eyes following her fingers as she traced the design on the blanket. Then, in a voice so quiet that they almost missed it, she said, "This is the first time I ever had one." "A nightlight?" Midoriya asked curiously. Eri shook her head. "A bed." Hearing this, IzuOcha and Midoriya both looked at each other with concern. Sometime during the day, they had forgotten that Eri never had the best childhood. Being held prisoner by a group of villains, experimented on every day, abused by a man who had no regard for the lives of others. It was a life no person should ever have, let alone a child. Seeing Eri's saddened look, Midoriya placed a hand on Eri's head. "I know you didn't have the best life, Eri," he said in a soft voice. "Heck, nobody should have gone what you went through. But it's going to be all right. Overhaul is gone, you've been freed, and you are surrounded by people who love and care for you. Even you too." Eri asked both students. "Even us, Eri," IzuOcha said with a smile. "We will care for you no matter what happens. You'll finally be able to live your life like you should. And we promise that we will never treat you like they did." "You promise?" Eri asked. IzuOcha stuck out her pinky finger and said, "Pinky promise." Eri locked her own pinky with IzuOcha's and gave the gravity user a small smile. "Welp," Midoriya said, "it's time for bed." "Good night, Eri." He leaned forward and hugged the little girl. "Good night, Papa," Eri said. "Good night, Eri," IzuOcha said as she too leaned in and hugged her. "Good night, Mama," Eri responded sleepily. And with that, she laid her head on the pillow and closed her eyes. As soon as they were sure she was asleep, IzuOcha and Midoriya plugged the nightlight into the wall, turned off the lights, and slowly closed the door so as not to wake her as they stepped into the hall. "Welp, it's been a long day, Deku," IzuOcha said as she yawned. "I think I'm gonna go to bed as well." "Good night." "Good night, IzuOcha," Midoriya said as the two students went their separate ways, he going downstairs to chat with the rest of the students and she going upstairs to her own room. As IzuOcha walked upstairs, she couldn't help but smile at how happy Eri seemed to finally have a place where she would be loved. She wouldn't have to worry about anyone hurting her or experimenting on her for their own personal gain. She would be able to live a happy life with Class 2A, her papa, and her. IzuOcha stopped dead in her tracks as she remembered what Eri had called her. She instantly broke out into a cold sweat. "Didi did she just CC call me? Mama," she screamed internally. The alarm clock in Midoriya's room continued to blare loudly until a hand slammed down on it. Groggily, Midoriya rose up and stared at the clock to see that it was 6:05 in the morning. Slowly, he got out of bed and made his way to the little girl sleeping in the bed next to his. "Eri," Midoriya said as he gently shook her shoulder. "It's time to get up." "5 more minutes, Papa," Eri groaned as she shook off Midoriya's hand. Instead of letting her rest, Midoriya picked her up and exited the room with Eri's head resting on his shoulder. Soon they found themselves in the living room and the kitchen, where they were greeted by a shark-toothed, red-haired student. "Morning, Midoriya," KiriMina said as he saw the two. "Morning, Eri." "Morning, Shima," Eri said as she rubbed her right eye sleepily. Both Midoriya and KiriMina had to smile. Even though the two of them tried to explain KiriMina's real name a few days ago, they were shot down by Mina, who insisted that Eri calling KiriMina Shima was just too adorable. "Eggs this morning?" KiriMina asked, to which Eri nodded her head. KiriMina cracked his knuckles as he began to make her breakfast, a tradition that began almost immediately when Eri came to live with them a week ago. Soon, Eri was presented with a plate of scrambled eggs, toast with strawberry jam, a peeled banana, and a glass of milk. Eri was about to pick up her chopsticks and begin eating when Midoriya stopped her. "Eri," Midoriya said, "what do we say before we begin eating?" "Oh," Eri said when she realized her mistake. She placed the chopsticks down, clapped her hands together, and said "Itadakimasu" before digging in. Soon, others began to emerge from their dorms, each greeting Eri with a smile which she returned in kind. "Morning, Eri," IzuOcha said sleepily as she made her way to the kitchen. "Morning, Mama," Eri replied with a smile. Behind her, IzuOcha could hear the snickers of Mina, Hanta, and Toru as they heard Eri address the gravity user with affection. IzuOcha groaned to herself as she remembered what she had told them a week ago. "IzuOcha," Mina asked in concern when she and the rest of the students saw IzuOcha's beet red face after she had tucked Eri to bed. "What's the matter, Eri?" IzuOcha said quietly. She called Deku Papa. "Makes sense," Mashiro said as the rest of the students nodded. "Considering the fact that he's been made her temporary guardian, it's natural that she sees him like a father figure." "So you're a wreck because Eri called Midoriya Papa?" Kayuka asked. "No, it's what she said next," IzuOcha replied. She called me Mama." The room was so silent you could hear a pin drop. Every one of the students were looking at IzuOcha with dumbfounded faces. Even Bakugou took a moment to look up from his history book to look at the gravity user. "Oh my god, she called you mama," Mina and Toru exclaimed as they both got in Uraraka's face and waved their arms up and down excitedly. "That is so stinking cute," Uraraka said as she put a finger to her lips and pointed up the stairs. "Iri's sleeping. And yes, she did call me her mama. That could also make sense," Ada said as he was snapped out of his shock by Mina and Toru. "What do you mean, Ada?" Tsuyu asked as she cocked her head to one side in confusion. "Iri never really had a mother figure in her life," Ada tried to explain. "Since you were the first female that showed her kindness when she arrived here, it's only natural that she sees you as the mother she never had. I would suggest that you play along with being called mama for the time being, Uraraka." "All right, Ada," Uraraka said with a sigh. "I'll go along with it if it helps her have a sense of a normal life." "So," Mina said with a sly grin, "when's the wedding?" "Mina," Uraraka exclaimed in shock as her cheeks reddened. "Uraraka," Midoriya asked in concern. "Yes?" Uraraka asked as she was snapped out of her thoughts. "Do you mind helping Iri get ready for the day?" Midoriya asked as Iri made her over. Of course," she said as she took Iri upstairs to shower, brush her teeth, and change her clothes. After 20 minutes, both girls came downstairs, ready for the day ahead of them. "You ready to go?" Tsuyu asked when she saw Iri. "Yep," Iri exclaimed as she took Tsuyu's hand and waved at Uraraka and Midoriya. "Bye, mama." "Bye, papa. See you later, Iri," Midoriya said as he made his way up the stairs to his own dorm room. "Have a great day at school," Uraraka smiled as she waved back. As soon as they were outside, Tsuyu knelt down on the ground so that Iri could climb on her back and wrap her arms around Tsuyu's neck. "You all set?" Tsuyu asked, to which Iri nodded. "All right then, hold on tight." And with that, Tsuyu leapt into the air and landed like a frog with Iri clinging tightly to her. After 30 minutes of leaping through the air, they stopped at a shiny, glass building where other kids who were about the same age as Iri were talking to each other. Last week, the teachers decided that Iri would need to attend school in order to receive her education as well as be preoccupied while the rest of Class 1 attended their own studies. Fortunately for Iri, due to the League of Villains ambush at the summer retreat, UA had decided to establish an elementary and middle school on campus for the younger siblings of the high students that attended. "Hi, sis," a small voice similar to Tsuyu's called out. Both Tsuyu and Iri turned to see Tsuyu's little sister, Satsuki, walk up to them. "Hi, Satsuki," Tsuyu responded with a smile. "Morning, Iri," Satsuki said as she noticed the girl standing next to her sister. When Iri first started attending school, she ended up eating alone during lunch since she didn't know anyone else. Satsuki was kind enough to sit next to her. Ever since then, the two of them were inseparable, spending time together doing crafts, talking about who the coolest hero was, what they hope to be when they grow up, and many other things. "Morning, Satsuki," Iri said with a smile. "I'll see you both after school, okay?" Tsuyu asked as the school bell rang. "Okay, bye," both girls said as they watched Tsuyu leap toward the main campus building. "So let me get this straight." Itsuka from Class 2B said as she, Monoma, Pony, Tetsu, and Ibara crowded around Midoriya, Uraraka, Kirishima, and Tsuyu's table in the cafeteria. "You four, your supervisors, and the big three fought against Overhaul and the 8 precepts of death in one." "Pretty much," Uraraka said. "That's so cool," Pony exclaimed. "Pity you all came out alive and well." "Damn it, Monoma. What did I tell you about teaching her to say that garbage?" Itsuka said as she used her quirk to slap the copy user upside his head. "Kirishima. Tetsu cried out. "I also heard you held your own against 2 of them. That's one of the manliest things I ever heard." "Damn right," Kirishima responded back as the 2 hardening users fist-pumped each other. "If they were in a Michael K. movie, I swear there would be explosions around them." Mina thought as she sweat dropped. "There have also been reports that you save a little girl and that she's now living with you," Ibara said in her monotone voice. "Is that true?" "Yep," Mina chimed in. "Her name is Iri. She's 6 years old, and she is just the cutest little thing. Here, I've got a photo of her." She pulled out her phone and showed it to the Class 2B students. In the picture was Iri being held in Uraraka's arms while Midoriya was standing next to them. "Awa," Itsuka cooed. "You're right, she's so cute. And she seems to be very happy." "And get this," Mina said with a sly grin on her face. "Iri has taken to calling Midoriya and Uraraka her papa and mama." The Class 2B students all looked at Midoriya and Uraraka with interest and confusion. Even Ibara's poker face faltered as she had a look of surprise. Is that true?" Itsuka asked. "Well, yes," Midoriya replied, his face a slight pink. "But I'm guessing that it's due to the fact that Iri's never had a real mother or father figure in her life. And since I was made her temporary guardian, it would be natural for her to call me her father. And Ada explained to me that since I was the first female that showed her kindness when she arrived here, it would make sense for her to call me her mother," Uraraka said with a face that was just as pink as Midoriya's. Well, if you morons are her parents, Monoma chimed in with his signature smug grin, then that little brat is going to have a pretty miserable IHNGGG. He didn't get the chance to finish as his face had just contorted in pain. The other students looked down and saw why. IzuOcha had taken the opportunity to plant the heel of her shoe right onto Monoma's toes. Even though she had an innocent smile on her face, the others could sense an aura of menace surrounding her as she looked up at Monoma. I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear you. IzuOcha twisted her heel back and forth. What were you saying about Eri? I said. Monoma struggled to speak through the pain of his toes being crushed. That ... you're both ... very lucky to have her ... and she'll be ... very happy here. Thanks, that means a lot, IzuOcha said as she lifted her foot. Anyway, Itsuka said, still in shock after what just happened. I gotta say, you and Midoriya look so happy together, IzuOcha. From what the picture shows, you two could be an actual couple. WWW what? Midoriya and IzuOcha shouted in unison. At this, they soon swiveled their heads to look at each other. Both of their faces turned brick red and their gazes fell on their food. They could hear a joyful giggle from Mina as she saw the two students avert each other's gazes. Yeah, a couple. Pony chimed in. A shitty one, at that. MONOMA. So, how's living with sis going? Satsuki asked Eri. It was lunchtime and the two girls were sitting in their usual spot. It's great, Eri said excitedly. Everyone's been really nice to me. And Mama and Papa are awesome. Don't make me laugh, a little girl said snidely as approached Eri and Satsuki's table. The girl was Miki Monoma, cousin to Nito Monoma. Like Nito, she was a copy user and was the queen bitch in her grade. As if anyone could care about a poor, pathetic girl like you. If those two morons that you call your parents had any brains at all, they would ditched you at the nearest orphana. She didn't get a chance to finish, for a boy behind her had struck her upside the head, knocking her out. Sorry about that, the boy said as he glanced at Eri and Satsuki. I'm pretty sure there's a hole where her heart should be. The name's Akihito Kendo, by the way, he added as he extended his hand with a smile. Itsuka Kendo from Class 2B is my cousin. I'm Satsuki Asui, little sister Tetsuyu Asui from Class 1A, Satsuki said. And this is Eri, she's living with my sister in Class 1A. Hi, Eri said simply, a hint of sadness in her voice. Listen Eri, Akihito said. Don't let what Miki said to you get you down. From what I've heard from others, it sounds like Midoriya and IzuOcha do care about you and they would never abandon you. Thanks, Akihito, Eri said with a smile. Hey sis, Satsuki called out Tetsuyu as the students were being dismissed. Hi Satsuki, hi Eri, Tsuyu smiled. How is school? Great, both girls said in unison. Good to hear that, Tsuyu said. Ready to head home, Eri? Yep, see you tomorrow, Satsuki, Eri said to her friend. See you tomorrow, Eri, Satsuki said, waving as the high schooler and her friend leaped their way back to the Wana dormitory. And then in science, we learned about the solar system and about all of the planets, Eri said excitedly to Midoriya and IzuOcha. The high school students had just returned to their dormitory to find an overjoyed Eri waiting for them. All of them greeted her with a smile. That sounds great, Eri, IzuOcha said as she smiled at the little girl. So you're learning a lot in school? Yep, Eri said. And I've made a few friends, like Satsuki, Big Sis Tsu's little sister. Unbeknownst to Eri, Tsuyu had heard everything and blushed at the prospect of being called Big Sis. Kakin, Eri said as she saw the hothead of Class 1 enter the room. She walked over and looked up at him. He, in turn, looked down on her with his usual angry expression. I heard that your quirk is to make explosions out of your hands, right? Yeah, what about it? Bakugou asked with a scowl. Could you show it to me, please? Eri asked as she gave Bakugou puppy dog eyes. Bakugou looked at the little girl and felt his heart skip a few beats. Don't you give in, he thought to himself. Don't you fucking give in. After a minute of self-control. Fine, he said, but I'm only gonna do it once. Yeah, Eri cried. Hey, Four Eyes, Bakugou called out to Ada. We got anything useless that needs to be destroyed. You should learn to respect your fellow classmates and call them by their proper names, Bakugou, Ada said in annoyance, to which Bakugou snorted. And yes, I have just the thing. Ada pulled out a stack of magazines tied together with twine and tossed it to Bakugou. Bakugou saw that they all had various naked women on the covers. I confiscated them from Minta, Ada said. I was planning on throwing them away where he wouldn't find them, but your way sounds better. No, Minta cried as he was being held back by Mashurao and Hanta. I'll do anything, Bakugou. Anything. Just don't do it. Ignoring Minta's pleas, Bakugou clenched the magazines and a loud boom came from his hand. Instantly, the magazines burst into flames until they were nothing but ashes. NOOO, Minta cried out in anguish. My babies. You murdered my babies. Wow, Kakin, Eri said in amazement. That's an awesome quirk. I know, Bakugou said with a smirk. My quirk's totally awesome. He took the opportunity to shoot a smug grin at Midoriya. You hear that, Deku? He thought to himself. Even she thinks that my quirk is better than your shitty one. I mean, it's not as cool as Papa's, but still, Eri said with a smile. Not as cool as DEKU quotas, Bakugou said through gritted teeth. Soon, his hands began to clench and explode in anger as a few veins along his forehead started to throb. He's gonna blow, Mina cried out in terror. Everyone, take cover, Minda said as he dove underneath the coffee table. Hanta used his tape quirk to grab Eri and reeled her away from Bakugou. He then handed her to IzuOcha, who leaped over the couch and hid behind it with Midoriya. Stay close to us, Eri, Midoriya instructed, to which she nodded. The rest of the students hid behind or underneath whatever furniture they could find and closed their eyes, waiting for the inevitable. After a few minutes, however, nothing happened. The students slowly peeked out from their hiding places to see any damage. What they saw caused all of them to go bug-eyed. Bakugou was just standing where he was with a blank look on his face. His eyebrows had even lost their crossness. What's up with Bakugou? Shoto whispered to no one in particular. I've seen this before, Midoriya said. Kaken gets so angry he just stops moving altogether. It's like some higher deity hit the pause button on him. And when he's like that, he added as his face paled, he becomes severely unstable. Rising to his feet, Kirishima moved slowly toward Bakugou so as to not trigger him. Bakugou, he asked as soon as he was 10 feet away. Are IzuOcha? If I don't end up destroying something or someone within the next 5 minutes, Bakugou interrupted in a monotonous voice that held no emotion. This entire building will look like someone dropped a nuke on it. At that precise moment, Kaminari entered the building. Hey guys, he said, unaware of what had happened. What did I? Oh, look at that, Bakugou said as his gaze turned to Kaminari. Continuity. Oh crap, Kaminari thought as he ran outside with a murderously smiling Bakugou hot on his tail. The next thing the other Wana students heard was the sounds of explosions, Bakugou's maniacal laughter, and Kaminari's screams of terror. Papa, Mama, Eri said with a pale face, there's something else I've learned today. What's that, sweetie? IzuOcha asked as she jumped at the sound of an explosion that was 60 feet away. Never talk to Kaken about whose quirk is cooler, Eri stated. Smart lesson to learn, Eri, Midoriya squeaked. After the Kaminari Bakugou incident, the rest of the evening continued on as it normally did. The students were doing their homework, some together, some on their own. Bakugou came back after 10 minutes with a Bakugou-style smile on his face. Kaminari came soon after looking like he had sat on the edge of a smokestack. Everything seemed to be back to normal until, Eri, come back here, Ida's voice called out. Midoriya and IzuOcha turned to see Ida chasing Eri, who had a chocolate chip cookie in each hand. Eri, Ida said as she giggled, you need to eat the healthy meal I've made for you before you go and consume non-nutritional food. Suddenly, a long piece of tape appeared in front of Eri that connected to the couch. Eri quickly jumped over the tape and continued to book it. Ida, however, was not so fortunate. As soon as his foot made contact with the tape, he keeled forward and landed flat on his face. Sorry, Ida, Hanta called out. As Eri covered her mouth to giggle, she felt 5 fingertips touch her on the head. The next thing she knew, she was floating in the air. IzuOcha stood facing her with her arms crossed. Eri, IzuOcha said in a stern yet friendly voice, Ida's right. I know that cookies taste delicious, but you have to have a steady diet of nutritional foods. You can't just eat sweets all the time. Now, she continued as she extended her hand out. Please hand over the cookies and eat the dinner Ida prepped for you. If you're good, you can 1 cookie for dessert. Okay, Eri said disappointedly as she handed the cookies to IzuOcha while she was upside down. IzuOcha smiled and gave Eri a kiss on the cheek, causing her to giggle. She then righted and released her, Eri to landing on her feet. You okay, Ida? Midoriya asked as his friend rose and shook his head vigorously. I'm fine, thanks, Ida said. Just a little dazed, that's all. Come now, Eri, he said as he extended his hand. Time for dinner. After dinner, IzuOcha brought Eri upstairs to bathe, brush her teeth and change into her nightgown. Afterwards, Eri returned and Momo read her a book. Minda tried to teach her how to play poker, but Ida stopped him, scolding him for trying to teach a 6-year-old how to gamble. At around 8 o'clock, Eri was found sleeping on the couch by Midoriya and IzuOcha. Smiling, IzuOcha carefully picked her up and she and Midoriya made their way up the stairs to his room. We'll be down in a bit, guys, Midoriya said to the others, to which they nodded in response. Don't stay up there too long, lovebirds, Mina said with a sly grin on her face. What? Midoriya and IzuOcha both said in unison as their faces reddened. They continued up the stairs avoiding each other's gazes until they reached Midoriya's room. When they entered, IzuOcha carefully placed Eri on her bed while Midoriya covered her up with a blanket. As the two began to leave, they suddenly heard a tiny voice say, Mama ... Papa ... Wait. Both students looked at each other in confusion, then back at Eri. Wait, she said, this time sounding desperate and worried. Wait for me. Midoriya flicked the light switch on and he and URARAKA both saw Eri lying on her bed with her eyes closed and a look of desperation on her face. Eri, Midoriya asked. Come back, Eri said as her lips began to quiver. Don't leave, Eri, URARAKA said, now sounding desperate herself as she gently shook Eri's shoulder. Eri, sweetie, wake up. Mama, Eri yelled out as tears began to flow out of her closed eyes. Papa, come back, Eri, Midoriya said as he too began to shake Eri. Listen to us. What you're seeing isn't real. Wake up. Almost instantly, Eri's eyes snapped open as she sat upright. She breathed heavily as her eyes swiveled from side to side so that she could recognize her surroundings. They soon turned to look at URARAKA and Midoriya, who were both torn between worry and confusion. Eri, Midoriya asked. Eri's lips quivered as she looked at the two students. The next second, she had flung herself at URARAKA and began to sob into her chest. Eri, Midoriya said worriedly. What happened? I was in this dark RR room, Eri said as she choked through her sobs. I saw you and Mama walking away from me. I tried to catch up to YU, but I couldn't reach you. I then called out to you, but you couldn't hear me. Then you both disappeared and I tried calling out to you over and over and ... Eri couldn't finish her sentence as she had resumed to sobbing into URARAKA's chest. URARAKA responded by giving a small smile and wrapping her arms around Eri for comfort. SHHH, she said softly, it's okay, Eri. We're here. You just had a bad dream, that's all. But, Eri said as she sniffled a bit and looked up at the gravity user. But it seemed so real. Believe us, Eri, Midoriya said. We will never leave you, not in a million years. Eri nodded, though she still looked sad. Seeing this, URARAKA picked her and sat down on the bed while carrying Eri. She then began to rub her back and hum softly. Then she began to softly sing. Come, stop your crying. It will be all right. Just take my hand. Hold it tight. I will protect you from all around you. I will be here. Don't you cry. Hearing URARAKA's soft voice made Eri smile a little. Midoriya's face, on the other hand, glowed bright red. He always knew that URARAKA was beautiful and that hearing her voice always made him act like a bumbling idiot. But he had no idea she could sing so beautifully as well. It was like she was the perfect woman. For one so small. You seemed so strong. My arms will hold you, keep you safe and warm. This bond between us can't be broken. I will be here. Don't you cry. Soon, Eri's eyes drooped and she let out a big yawn. Midoriya couldn't help but smile as he continued to listen to URARAKA's melodic voice. Cause you'll be in my heart. Yes, you'll be in my heart. From this day on. Now and forevermore. You'll be in my heart. No matter what they say. You'll be here in my heart, always. URARAKA and Midoriya glanced down to see Eri with her eyes closed. Gently, URARAKA placed her head against the pillow and draped the blanket over her. Midoriya leaned in and kissed Eri on the forehead. Good night, Eri. URARAKA leaned down and kissed Eri's cheek. Sweet dreams, sweet pea. She and Midoriya quietly made their way to the doorway and turned to look back at Eri. She looks so peaceful, doesn't she, Deku? URARAKA asked as she placed a hand on his chest and rested her head on his shoulder. She sure does, Deku said with a smile as he slowly closed the door. His gaze then turned to URARAKA's hand on his chest and his cheeks turned bright red. URARAKA glanced down at what he was flustered about and her cheeks turned a similar color. Almost on instinct, the two leaped away with their backs turned from each other. I am actually pretty tired, so I'm gonna go to bed. URARAKA stuttered, not even looking at Midoriya's back. Oh okay, Midoriya said as well. I'm gonna go downstairs and hang out WW with Ida and the others. Night, both students shouted as they ran off in different directions. Meanwhile, Mina was cursing to herself from one of the unoccupied rooms. Damn, she said when she saw both Midoriya and URARAKA leave in a fluster. And I thought they would actually kiss. A month had passed since Eri first stepped through the doors of the Class 1 dorm. Midoriya and URARAKA were doing their best to not just become superheroes, but also to be good temporary parents. There were times when they had to be strict with her, but she took it in stride, even if she didn't like the outcome. Of course, those conversations would always end with a kiss on her cheek from either of them, just to show that they still loved her. The rest of Class 1 did their best to help Eri out with her daily routine. Suyu still took her to and from school. Kirishima made her breakfast every other day while Midoriya and URARAKA alternated on the rest. Momo read a bedtime story to her every night. Ada made sure the students stayed in line in terms of the Eri rules, and after much pleading from Eri and some convincing on Toru's part toward Midoriya and URARAKA, Mashurao began to teach her martial arts in order to battle villains when she couldn't use her quirk. Bakugou didn't do much. He spent most of his time doing his homework, ignoring everyone, or just shouting at them. Eri suspected that he was still peeved about the time she asked him to show her his quirk. As the days progressed, the weather began to change. The colors of the leaves changed from green to a dazzling display of red, orange, and yellow. The air became crisper and temperatures dropped a bit as a chill came into the air. All of the students started wearing warmer clothes and some had resorted to wearing fleece coats and scarves. During school one day, Eri caught wind of a couple of students having a conversation. She was able to catch one word that sparked her curiosity: Halloween. She had heard it somewhere before, but didn't know what it meant. It was on her mind for the rest of the day until she couldn't take it anymore. After dinner, when she and the one of students were in the living room, she finally asked about it. "Mama, Papa," Eri asked as she looked up at Midoriya and IzuOcha. "I heard something today at school. What's Halloween?" "An excellent question, Eri," Ada chimed in. "To understand what Halloween is, we must go back to the 10th century. Oh balls," the others thought in dismay. Whenever anyone asked a simple question, Ada always had to give a lecture about the entire subject. Halloween, or All Hallows Eve, Ada began, can be traced back to 10th century Ireland during the farming festival called Samhain, which occurred between October 31st and November 1st. The holiday was meant to mark the end of harvest season and the beginning of winter. As the crops died, the farmers believed that there was a day when the spirits of the dead could rise up from their graves. During the festival, they would dress in disguise to fool and ward off the spirits in the hopes of protecting their land throughout the upcoming winter. In regular, non-Ada terms, KiriMina chimed in before Ada could continue. Halloween is a celebration on the night of October 31st in which folks dress up in different costumes, walk up to people's doorstep, and say trick or treat. And if you say it politely, the folks will give you free candy. "Candy?" Eri asked as her eyes sparkled with delight and her mouth began to water at the thought. IzuOcha and Midoriya chuckled a bit at the sight of Eri being on cloud 9. Soon, Eri shook her head and returned herself back to the topic at hand. "So what kind of costumes do people wear?" "Oh, there are all kinds of costumes," Mina said delightfully as she used her fingers to count. "There's superheroes, monsters, movie and TV characters, sexy kittens," Minta said as his eyes glazed over in perverted thought. "Naughty nurses, slutty cops, playboy boo." He stopped immediately as soon as he felt the glares of every other student in the room. I'll just stop talking now," he concluded meekly. "Anyway," Momo said as she turned her gaze from the class pervert to Eri, "you can be whatever you want to be for Halloween, as long as it's not one of Minta's suggestions." Eri began to ponder a bit as to what she wanted to be for Halloween. On one hand, it would be cool to dress up as a superhero, but she saw caped crime fighters every day. She could be a movie or TV character, but she didn't watch a lot of those. Most of her days were spent playing games with either Midoriya, IzuOcha, and the other students. As she continued to ponder, her eyes soon fell on a book that was in Momo's hands. Momo's eyes glanced down at what Eri was looking at and handed her the book with a smile. As Eri flipped through the book, she noticed that some of pages included pictures of people posing in medieval clothes. She continued to flip through until, "Mama, Papa," Eri exclaimed when she stopped on a page in the book. "This is what I want to be for Halloween." Midoriya and IzuOcha leaned in and saw a picture of a princess in a purple dress with a tiara on her head waving to a sea of loyal and loving subjects. "That looks good, Eri," IzuOcha said as she looked through the book herself. "Say," she addressed to the rest of Class 1A, "how about all of us wear costumes from this book?" Most of the students nodded in agreement. It would be cool to do a themed costume set as a group, if everyone can decide which costume they want. Momo said, "I can make the costumes and that way we can save time and No, friction. Way, Bakugou blurted out as the rest of Class 1A looked at him with shock. "I am willing to do this and that for the kid, but there is no way in Hades that I am dressing up like a fairy fa." He stopped, however, when he saw Eri's eyes peering above the book as she held it up for him to see. He glanced down and saw a picture of a mean-looking dude who was riding a dragon into battle. "Who's this?" he asked. "He's a war chief, Kaken," Eri said as she pointed at the man. "He looks like he is a pretty strong and awesome person." After glaring at Eri for a few minutes, Bakugou said, "Fine. I'll do it, but only if I get to be that guy," he added as he pointed at the person in the book. Eri smiled widely as the rest of Class 1A hooted and cheered. 2 weeks later, the sky began to darken on the night of October 31st, and all of Class 1A was abuzz with excitement, especially Eri. After getting the costume requests from her classmates, Momo was able to use her quirk to create costumes for them all. After much deliberation amongst themselves, it was decided that Eri would go trick-or-treating with Midoriya, IzuOcha, Takoyami, and Tsuyu. Even Satsuki was invited to join Eri on her excursion. It was around 6 o'clock at night when IzuOcha was fitting Eri into her princess costume. The gown was purple with sparkles all around and poofs on the shoulders. For footwear, Eri was wearing shiny purple shoes. IzuOcha had to give Momo credit. The design and detail of the dress was flawless. As soon as the dress was on, IzuOcha placed a little tiara on top of Eri's head. She then pivoted the mirror so that Eri could get a look at herself. She chuckled a bit at the look of awe on Eri's face when she looked at her reflection. "Now that your dress is all done," IzuOcha said as she put the mirror in its original spot, "it's time I got into my costume." After a few minutes, IzuOcha checked herself in the mirror. She wore calf-length boots, brown leggings, a tan gown with a belt around her waist and tiny straps for her wrists, and a small maroon shawl that had a hole for her head and that was attached to a pointy, maroon wizard's hat. In her right hand, she held a large wooden staff with a red jewel in the center. "Wow, Mama," Eri said as she looked at IzuOcha in awe and wonder. "You look so pretty." "Oh, thanks, sweetie," IzuOcha said as she leaned down and kissed Eri on the forehead, to which the girl giggled. "Want to go see if Papa's ready?" Eri nodded her head vigorously. Using her free hand, IzuOcha scooped up Eri and exited her room. As she walked down the hallway, 2 doors opened up to reveal Kirishima and Mina come from their respective rooms. Kirishima was wearing gray pants, black boots, a torn loincloth, a sleeveless gray jacket, a tiger-striped scarf, and a metal glove on his left arm. Wrapped around his waist were 2 small swords that could be used as daggers. Mina was wearing calf-length boots, black leggings, a short skirt, a tight fur top with a strap on her left shoulder, and a pair of black gloves. "Oh my God, Eri," Mina cried out as she ran up to the little girl in excitement. "You look so cute in that dress." "Thanks, Auntie Mina. You look cute in your costume too. And you look so cool in those clothes, Uncle Shima," she added as she looked on at Kirishima. "Glad it was to your liking, Eri," a familiar female voice said behind the group. Eri and others turned to see Shoto dressed like a prince and Momo in a pretty revealing night costume. "It sure was," Eri responded with a smile. "Thanks, Auntie Momo." Momo responded in kind with a smile, though she was fangirling inside. "If you morons are done talking," Kaken said as he too walked out of his dorm room, "we can get this over with and I can ditch you losers." Shaking their heads, Eri and the others made their way downstairs to join the other WANA students. When they reached the second floor, a door opened up to reveal Midoriya wearing dark blue pants, red boots, a white undershirt, a sleeveless green vest, and gray gloves. He had a satchel slung around his shoulder and a sheathed sword attached to his hip. "Wow," Eri said, her eyes widening and sparkling as she looked at Midoriya. "You look great, Papa." She then turned her attention to IzuOcha and asked, "Don't Papa look handsome, Mama?" At these words, both Midoriya's and IzuOcha's cheeks turned bright pink. IzuOcha stuttered as the 2 friends looked at each other in embarrassment. Behind them, Kirishima and Mina were glancing slyly at each other. Momo and Shoto were giving small smiles, and Bakugou was rolling his eyes in annoyance. You look nice, Deku," IzuOcha blurted out loud. You too," Midoriya yelled out. "Let's get going." And with that, both students bolted downstairs with a confused Eri still clinging to IzuOcha. The others, however, had mixed reactions. Bakugou grumbled something like "fucking morons." Momo and Shoto gave exhausted sighs, and Kirishima was trying to calm down an agitated Mina. As they reached the main floor, they soon saw other students in their costumes. Ida was dressed up as a knight. Sui was a barmaid. Takoyami had a black cloak on that covered every part of his body except for his head. And Toru, of course, was only wearing gloves. As soon as Eri came into view, everyone gathered around her. They oohed and awed about how pretty she looked in her dress. Eri, of course, responded in kind with a smile and a giggle. "Hey Eri," a small, familiar voice called out to Eri and she turned to see Satsuki running up to her. "That's a cool dress you have on," she stated as she looked at her friend. "Thanks, Satsuki," Eri replied. "Your costume looks cool too." Satsuki was wearing a dress similar to her sister's. "Yeah, I figured it would be cool for both Big Sis and me to wear the same costume," Satsuki said with a smile. "What's up, 1A?" A feminine voice called out from nowhere. Everyone turned their heads to see a girl with pink hair who was wearing baggy pants, a white tank top with dirt stains all over it, and a leather apron. She also wore a leather belt with various tools attached to it. "Hatsum," Kyoka asked in surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Toru and Mina invited me," Mei grinned. "They told me about a medieval costume theme in your dorm and I couldn't resist." "Like the outfit?" she asked as she gave a wink and a peace sign. "I'm a blacksmith." Her eyes soon shot to Midoriya, and they sparkled at the sight before them. "Holy cow, Midoriya," she said as she ran and got up close to him. "That's a wicked costume you've got there. If you ever get the chance to come to the workshop, I can make a few more of my babies to add as accessories for oomph." 2 small hands pushed her roughly away from Midoriya. "What the heck?" she soon asked as her eyes fell upon Eri, whose arms were stretched in a protective motion and who had a pout on her face as she looked up at Mei. "No," Eri's tone was serious. "Papa belongs to Mama." "Eri," IzuOcha said in shock as her face turned red from embarrassment. She raced over and picked Eri up as she rubbed the back of her head. "So sorry, Hatsum," IzuOcha said as she smiled sheepishly at the mechanic. "She just gets so protective sometimes of her papa. This is Eri, by the way," she added, remembering that Mei had never met the little girl before. "She's the girl Deku, Tsuyu, Kirishima, and I saved from those bad guys a few months ago." "I see," Mei said as she looked at the little girl. "Anyway, no harm done." Maybe we ought to get going if we want to get some sweets, Tsuyu suggested as she looked up at the clock. Midoriya, Uraraka, Satsuki, and Takoyami nodded in agreement. It would be best to head out now before the teenagers came out to cause havoc. As they went outside, some of the students left to check out the haunted house set up by Class 1B while others went out to take in the sights. Have a great time, Eri and Satsuki, Mina called out as KiriMina dragged her along to join Bakugou, Toru, Hatsume, Mashurao, and a few others at the haunted house. And remember, always remind others that Papa belongs to Mama, Shiro said with a chuckle as he left with Shoto, Momo, Kaminari, Ida, and Kyoka. Shiro, Midoriya, and Uraraka stuttered in shock and embarrassment. Tsuyu and Satsuki tried hard to hold back giggles while Takoyami gave an ever-so-rare smile in amusement. Only Eri was left confused about why her mama and papa got embarrassed around each other. As soon as Midoriya and Uraraka composed themselves, the 6 of them continued on their quest for candy. Soon they reached their first house. The place was decked out with cobwebs, glow-in-the-dark skeletons, and giant Halloween blow-ups. Now remember, Eri, Uraraka said, you walk up to the front door, ring the doorbell, and when the person opens the door, you say trick or treat, and they'll give you candy. Now go ahead, sweetie. Eri smiled confidently and took a few steps before stopping abruptly, as she looked up at the looming house with its various creepy and scary ornaments. She realized that she was both nervous and terrified at the same time. The eeriness and darkness of the night didn't help matters. The house looked even darker and scarier that way. As Eri looked on in fear, Midoriya and Uraraka looked at each other with worry. Maybe it was too much pressure on Eri to be out on a night like this, they both thought. There are always those that got too into the holiday by dressing up in costume and scaring trick-or-treaters when they knocked, or whose houses were so intimidating that nobody ever came. Not to mention the fact that the darkness was always something that Eri was scared of, considering her previous living arrangement. Maybe we should take her ba. Come on, Eri, Satsuki said, snapping Eri, Midoriya, and Uraraka out of their thoughts as she took Eri's hand and smiled. We can do it together, you know you want that candy, she added with a small smirk. Oh okay, Eri said. Although she was still slightly nervous, she slowly walked up the front porch and waited while Satsuki jumped up and rang the doorbell. After a few seconds, the door opened to reveal a woman in her late 60s looking down on them with a smile. Trick or treat, Satsuki said with a smile as she lifted her bucket. Tea trick or treat, Eri said meekly as she lifted her bucket as well. My, aren't you two just the cutest? Here, one for each of you, she said. She placed a tiny wrapped candy bar in each of their buckets. Thank you, both girls said as they made their way toward their elders. It was on her way towards Midoriya and Uraraka that Eri's face lit up with excitement, and she ran towards her parents until she was scooped up in Midoriya's arms. Mama, Papa, Eri said excitedly. Look, I did it. That's great, Eri, Midoriya said as he saw the singular candy bar in the bucket. We're both so proud of you. So I take it you don't want to head back home? Uraraka asked with a smile on her face. Nope, Eri said with a toothy grin as Takoyami, Tsuyu, and Satsuki watched with amusement. Well then, Midoriya said as he placed Eri on his shoulders. Where to next, Princess Eri? Filled with enough confidence to rival her grandpa might, Eri pointed her finger rigidly down the street and said to the next house, Sir Deku. The others chuckled in response as they continued their quest for free candy. Needless to say, the excursion was a complete success. Nearly every house they went to had a friendly neighbor who was willing to offer candy. Most of those who answered their doors also commented on how both Eri and Satsuki looked so cute in their costume. At around 8:30 p.m., both girls had their buckets almost filled to the brim with candy and were tuckered out from all the walking they had done. It got to the point where Eri had fallen asleep, resting her head on Midoriya's shoulder while Satsuki was sleeping in Tsuyu's arms. I'm gonna take Satsuki back home, Tsuyu said to Midoriya and Uraraka. My parents said that they wanted her back by 9 at the very latest. I'm going with her as well, Takoyami added. After what happened with the 8 percepts of death, it's best that we stick together. Awa, Dark Shadow said sarcastically. You sure you don't want someone to harm your precious Why? Shut it, you, Takoyami said quickly, a slight hint of pink around his cheeks. The others couldn't help but giggle and chuckle at his obvious discomfort. Anyway, we better get going. All right, Midoriya said. We'll see you when you get back. Be careful, you too, Uraraka said. The two then waved at their classmates as they ran off. Once Takoyami and Tsuyu were out of sight, Midoriya and Uraraka started back with Eri. As they continued to walk, Uraraka couldn't help but smile a little as she watched Eri sleeping on Midoriya's shoulder. She closed her eyes and imagined being in a flower field overlooking the city. Eri was running toward her, smiling and laughing. Laughing with her, Uraraka scooped her up and planted a kiss on her cheek. She then noticed Midoriya walking up to them with a loving look on his face. At that moment, their eyes began to close slowly as they leaned in. Uraraka's eyes suddenly snapped open as her face turned dark pink. She had just thought about kissing Midoriya. Uraraka, Midoriya asked, causing her to jump in surprise. Are you okay? JUSTFINEINNOWASITHINKINGABOUTKISSINGYOU. Uraraka shouted quickly as her face turned a darker shade. Oh okay, Midoriya said, though he could sense that something was up that she wasn't telling him. After a while, they had returned to the dormitory. Most of the students had already gone to bed or were out enjoying the festivities. Slowly, they made way to Midoriya's room and gently placed Eri on her bed. It was only when Uraraka began to pull the covers over her when Eri slowly opened her eyes halfway. Mama, Papa, she asked sleepily. Where? SHHH, Midoriya said quietly. We're back home. Big sis Tsuyu and Takoyami took Satsuki back. Oh, Eri said softly. Candy. It's right here, sweetie, Uraraka said as she leaned the bucket so that Eri could get a look inside. Eri smiled as she saw the container filled with sugary goodies. She then turned her gaze towards the two students. Thank you both. So muuu. A huge yawn stole her words, and she drifted back to sleep immediately. Both Midoriya and Uraraka looked fondly at the little girl in front of them. They couldn't believe their good fortune. It seemed as though it was only yesterday that they had begun their path towards becoming superheroes. Now, they were charged with giving the little girl in front of them the life she deserved. As they continued to watch Eri smile a little as she slept, one thought crossed both of their minds. Pleasant dreams. Our precious little princess. Where are you going, Mama? Eri asked as Uraraka put her shoes on. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon in Japan. The trees were almost completely bare and the heating system was on low. Most of the students were wearing scarves and leather boots. And everywhere you turned, there was always something pumpkin-related being sold. Some of the TUA students were busy cramming for their midterms while others were trying to do some fall cleaning. I'm heading off to see Gunhead for some training, Uraraka said as she put on a scarf. He taught me during my internship this past summer. I've been slacking a bit in my martial arts, so I set up some training with him to help me out. Cool, Eri said as her eyes sparkled. Can I come too, Mama? Please? I don't know, Eri, Uraraka said. I'm not sure Gunhead would allow someone as young as you, but I want to watch you train, Eri interrupted, a slight hint of desperation in her tone. I've already seen how Papa fights. I want to see you fighting. And I want to meet this Gunhead person. Please, she pleaded as she gave puppy dog eyes in order to sweeten the answer. Maybe we should bring her, Uraraka, Midoriya said. It would be good for her to get out of the house. Besides, I kinda want to meet this Gunhead. From what you've told me, he sounds like a really great guy. Letting out a sigh of defeat, Uraraka knelt down in front of Eri and gave her a stern look. Fine, she said, you can come with me to meet Gunhead. But, she added as soon as she saw the little girl's face light up, you are not allowed to interrupt either me or Gunhead when we are training. What we are doing is dangerous and I don't want you getting hurt. You will have to stay with Papa on the sidelines until I am done. Understand? Okay, Eri muttered, looking slightly disappointed. Suddenly, an idea popped into Midoriya's head and knelt down as well. Hey, how about this? He said. If you behave yourself while at the dojo, maybe we'll watch a movie of your choice tonight before you go to bed. Yeah, Eri said in excitement. At this, Uraraka's stern face faltered and she couldn't help but smile at Eri's adorableness. With that, Midoriya buttoned Eri up in a warm fall coat and wrapped a wool scarf around her neck and mouth. Afterwards, Uraraka put little brown gloves on her hands to keep them from being cold. Ready, Eri? Uraraka asked as soon as the little girl was snug and warm. Eri responded by giving a small thumbs up through the glove. All right then, Uraraka exclaimed as she and Midoriya each took one of Eri's hands. Let's get going. After walking through the city for about 30 minutes, the small family arrived at a large building with glass windows and a sign that said Gunhead School for Martial Arts. Walking inside, Eri noticed that the floor was completely covered with floor mats. There were also punching bags hanging from the ceiling, dumbbells, and weights to help with muscle growth. A voice called out to them. All three pairs of eyes turned to see a muscular man with gray spiky hair walk towards them. Eri and Midoriya noticed that he wore what looked like gun barrels around his lower arms that stopped at his wrists. He also wore a white mask that had 4 holes in it. I guess that's why they call him Gunhead, they both thought. As he stopped in front of them, Eri and Midoriya both gulped at how intimidating he looked with his bulky structure and revolver chambers on his arms. Uraraka, Gunhead exclaimed in a chipper voice. It's been too long. How are you? I'm well, sensei. Thanks for asking. Uraraka responded as she placed her fist in her palm and bowed before her teacher. By the way, sensei, she said as she gestured toward Midoriya. This is Deku. He's one of my classmates at UA. I see, Gunhead said as he looked at the green-haired boy. So you're the boy who called Uraraka during her internship. Why, yes sir, Midoriya said nervously. And my name's actually Midoriya. I see. Gunhead stuck his hand out. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, boy. Reluctantly, Midoriya took Gunhead's hand and shook it. Once he had let go, Gunhead's gaze then turned to Eri. And who might you be? He asked. My name's Iri, Mr. G. Gunhead, Iri said, who was just as nervous as Midoriya. My goodness, Gunhead said as he rubbed Iri's head. What a cute name for such an adorable little girl. Gunhead's adoring nature caused Iri to calm down a bit and smile up at the man. And who are your parents? He asked. At this, Iri perked up and swiveled to look at the two students. Papa, Mama, she said as she pointed first to Midoriya and then to IzuOcha. Gunhead turned his gaze from Iri as he looked at the two friends, who had deep blushes on their faces and were sweating profusely. Oh my, Gunhead said as he placed a hand over his mouth. I swear they get younger every year. No. I, it's not like that. Midoriya and IzuOcha both cried out in embarrassment and shock as they waved their hands back and forth and their faces turned red as bricks. Iri looked up at her mama and papa in confusion as they tried to explain. It's just that we were tasked to look after her. I mean, we're just friends. I've never even kissed a girl. They stopped, however, when they heard Gunhead laughing. I know, Gunhead said through chuckles. All Might and Eraserhead told me everything about your situation. It was just too easy. Not cool, Gunhead. Both students thought as they felt like they had died a little inside. Not cool. The rest of the day was uneventful. After that little fiasco, IzuOcha trained with Gunhead while Iri and Midoriya watched from the sidelines. Of course, that didn't stop Iri from imitating IzuOcha by doing mock punches and kicks. This caused Midoriya to hold back a stifled laugh when he noticed how cute she looked. After an hour and a half of training, IzuOcha packed up her things and the three of them said their goodbyes to Gunhead, who gave off a salvo of doting comments to Iri as she left. Well then, IzuOcha said as soon as they were outside and she squatted to meet Iri's gaze. Since you were so good while Mama was training ... What movie do you want to watch tonight? Iri pressed a finger to her scarf chin and thought until she said, can we watch Mona? Sure, Iri, Midoriya said with a chuckle. After you eat your dinner and get ready for bed, of course. Yo. After Iri finished her dinner, she ran up to her room so fast that she could have rivaled Ida. 20 minutes later, she came scurrying down in a green nightgown and stars in her eyes. After Midoriya and IzuOcha explained that they had to prep as well, Momo pulled Iri aside for her daily bedtime story just to occupy her. After another 20 minutes, IzuOcha and Midoriya came down wearing their own pajamas, and the rest of Class 2 left the three of them alone for the night. As Iri watched in awe at the amazing music, the animation, and the unique characters in the movie, Izuku and Ochako couldn't help but smile at the little girl. This was a perfect example of what she deserved, a happy life with people who cared about her and would protect her from any danger. As they looked up, they soon realized that their faces were mere inches from each other. Their faces turned a pinkish hue and they quickly looked away in embarrassment. While the family was watching their movie, Mina had snuck into the kitchen to grab a bottle of strawberry milk from the fridge. As she slowly closed the fridge door, she glanced at the three and gave a small smile. As soon as her foot made contact with the fourth step, however, she stood in shock by what she saw. Slowly, she poked her head out and smiled at how adorable Izuku, IzuOcha, and Iri looked. Instantly, she took out her phone and started texting like mad. Instantly, every student's phone except for Bakugou's and Minta's pinged. As they glanced down, all of the students saw the exact same message. Downstairs, living room. Now, within a minute, Class 2 came to the top of the first story stairs. Mina, Kirishima asked as he saw his friend looking giddy. Mind telling us what? SHHH. Mina said as she put a finger to her lips. She pointed to something downstairs while making a silent yet high-pitched squeal. The students looked at where she was pointed and gave wide-eyed stares at the image of Iri, Midoriya, and IzuOcha watching their movie. That ... is so adorable, Momo said softly as she placed her hand over her mouth. Seriously, they look like one big happy family, Siro said with a toothy grin. Yeah, definitely, Shoto said, though he was looking more toward Momo and her enthusiastic face when he said that. As his gaze shifted to the living room, he saw an image in his head of himself and Momo, all grown up, sitting on a couch while she cradled a baby girl with black hair in her arms. Around them, two little boys, one with red hair and the other with white hair, ran around the couch playing a silly sort of game. As the future Momo and Shoto laughed at their antics, they faced each other and lovingly pressed their foreheads together. As the image played out in Shoto's mind, he couldn't help but smile a little at the thought of a future like that. Maybe we should head back upstairs, Ida said quietly. I'm sure none of us want to disturb them. The others nodded in agreement. It was best to leave the family alone. As they quietly made their way back upstairs, Shoto thought to himself as he looked at Momo walking ahead of him. Maybe someday I can have that life with her. He smiled minutely. Someday. If only he had known that she was having those same thoughts as well. It was a beautiful Wednesday afternoon in November at UA High and Class 1 was gathering their things for the end of the day. As they were preparing to see the little bundle of joy that called them Mama and Papa, IzuOcha and Midoriya were both wondering what they should make Iri for dinner that night. They had put out some ground beef in the fridge the night before, so that left how to include vegetables and how to create it in a way that would surprise her. Maybe we could try meatloaf, Midoriya asked before he dismissed it, knowing that Eri had that dish last week. What about tacos? IzuOcha asked before she realized that Eri would probably never touch another one of those after the incident back at beginning of the month. One Tuesday night, Class 1 had decided to have tacos for dinner, which Eri was more than excited for. However, things had taken a turn for the worse that night. As it turned out, Minda had tried to pull a prank on Kaminari by putting hot sauce in his taco. Unfortunately, the taco had accidentally ended up on Eri's plate. Needless to say, Eri ended up crying from the burning in her mouth and Minda ended up sleeping outside, his face all black and blue from the smacks he received from IzuOcha and the girls, as well as from Kaminari and Bakugou. How about? Midoriya began, but stopped when he noticed that Mr. Aizawa was standing right in front of them with a note in his hand. Midoriya, IzuOcha. He handed them the note. The principal would like to speak with you both in his office. Midoriya and IzuOcha looked at each other in surprise. Neither one of them had done anything wrong in the past few months, unless you counted Midoriya and Bakugou's second fight. But that was before they began their internships and had met Eri. As they made their way to the principal's office, they couldn't help but think the worst. You don't think something bad happened to Eri, do you? IzuOcha asked as they neared the principal's office. No, Midoriya said simply. If something had happened to her, Mr. Aizawa would have told us himself. After a few minutes, the two students arrived outside the principal's office. Taking a deep breath, both entered to find the little talking animal standing in front of them. Ah, Midoriya, IzuOcha, Nezu said as he raised his right paw and waved. Though his expression rarely changed, the students could see a hint of something unpleasant in his eyes. Distrust, anger, restraint. They hoped it wasn't directed toward them. How nice of you to join us. Us? Both students thought as they glanced around. Who else is? Their thoughts were soon answered when they saw two people to their left. One was a large, burly man in his 40s with bulging muscles that strained against his business suit. He had a scar over his right eye, a tattoo of a dragon's head on the other side of his face, and wore an expression of utmost anger. It was enough to have both Midoriya and IzuOcha shaking from sheer intimidation. The other was a man in his 60s and sitting in a wheelchair. He had wispy white hair and a somewhat athletic frame for someone his age. Even though his skin was wrinkled, IzuOcha and Midoriya could still make out the various tattoos on his arms. They also noticed that the pinky on his right hand was much smaller than the other fingers, as though it had been crudely cut off. Yakuza, they both thought. You must be Izuku Midoriya and Ochako IzuOcha, the old man asked as the bigger man wheeled his chair over to the two students. The old man then gave the best bow he could, while Midoriya and IzuOcha themselves gave bows as they knew they should. My name is Shinobu Nasamuri. This is my escort, Reiki Watanabe. He gestured to the man behind him. Watanabe only grunted in response. Perhaps, Nasamuri continued, it would be best if we could all have a seat. At this, the five of them made their way into the conference room next door. Once inside, Nasamuri and Watanabe sat on one end of the table while Midoriya and IzuOcha sat on the other. Nezu sat in the middle between them. Now then, Nasamuri began. You are probably wondering why I wished to speak with you too. IzuOcha and Midoriya only nodded in response. Giving a small smile, Nasamuri said, lately, it has come to my attention that you and a few other heroes fought against my old syndicate, the 8 Precepts of Death. Also, he continued, I have also learned that you aided in the rescue of a young girl named Eri, whom I care for dearly. Forgive me, Mr. Nasamuri, Midoriya said upon hearing his daughter's name, but how exactly do you know all of this? Well, to tell you the truth, my boy, Nasamuri said with a sense of confidence, I was the capo for said group and was the teacher of Kai Chisaki until a few months ago when I fell ill and gave him control of the group. And to answer your question about Eri, she is my granddaughter. IzuOcha's and Midoriya's eyes widened in shock. They had heard that Eri had a grandfather, but they never knew that he was alive, and he was the former leader of the group that held her captive. When I got out of the hospital, Nasamuri said, not noticing the change in the teens' faces, I had heard about what Chisaki had done to both the organization and to my little Eri. Needless to say, I was shocked and appalled by the details, so it's safe to say that I felt no remorse when I saw on the news that he was imprisoned in Tartarus. A perfect example of justice being served, if I do say so myself. But IzuOcha stuttered slightly, still in shock at the previous announcement. What does this have to do with Deku and me? Ah, yes, Nasamuri said as he motioned at Watanabe, who picked up 2 black briefcases and placed them on the table. I wish to commend you both for taking my granddaughter into your home. From what Nezu has told me, he added as he gestured toward the biped animal, Eri has been taken good care of and that she has been extremely happy thanks to you too. For that, I am forever grateful. So, I wish to reward you both for all that you have done. After he motioned with his hand once more, Watanabe pushed the 2 briefcases toward IzuOcha and Midoriya. As the cases slapped into their palms, the shock from the impact traveled up their arms. Watanabe was strong. When they opened the briefcases, Midoriya and IzuOcha's eyes widened in shock. Both cases were stuffed with cash. Chuckling at their amazement, Nasamiri said, "Consider what's in those briefcases compensation for any expenses you may have lost from raising Eri, plus a little extra to show my appreciation for what you've done." All in all, each briefcase contains 120 million yen. IzuOcha and Midoriya couldn't believe what they were seeing. 120 million yen each for taking care of Eri. Midoriya's mind raced at the thought of having all that money. He could pay off his outstanding student debts. He could give some to his mother as a way of saying thanks for raising him all those years when he was quirkless and had nearly lost hope of ever becoming a hero. He could pay for Eri's tuition. She could go to the best public colleges in all of Japan. IzuOcha's mind was going through a similar process. Not only could this be good for both them and Eri, but she could give a majority of this money to her parents. It was always her goal to become a hero and earn enough money to give her parents the life they deserved. The money in front of her could do so much toward that goal. "So," she said as she glanced away to look at Nasamiri, "this is all for us." "Indeed," he said before a look of seriousness spread across his face. "If you return Eri to me." All of the hopes and dreams that had formed in IzuOcha's and Midoriya's minds were immediately shattered when those words came out of Nasamiri's mouth. Slowly, they looked up with impassive looks on their faces. "Give Eri back to you?" Midoriya asked slowly. "Indeed," Nasamiri said with a nod. "She is my granddaughter, after all. And I can assure you, she will be placed in a better home and will be treated well. When available, we could even set times when she could meet you two for a day." IzuOcha and Midoriya looked down at the money, still untouched. With this, they could use to help not just themselves, but their parents as well. Goals could be met, better living arrangements could be made, and even tuition wouldn't be a problem. But it would mean having to give up perhaps the most precious thing in their lives. Eri was a child who suffered so much at a young age, and yet who always had a smile on her face whenever she made someone happy. She was selfless, caring, obedient, and was willing to help in any way she could. And then, there was the promise they made to her months ago. "It's okay, Eri. We're here. You just had a bad dream, that's all. But it seemed so real. Believe us, Eri, we will never leave you. Not in a million years." As the two looked at each other, they both knew their answer. "We're sorry, Mr. Nasamiri," Midoriya said as he and IzuOcha closed their cases with decisive snaps and pushed them toward the old man. "But we can't accept these terms. If the problem is the money," Nasamiri said as Watanabe took the briefcases, "then I can surely offer you." "The problem isn't about the money," IzuOcha interrupted as she and Midoriya rose from their chairs. "It's about Eri. We can't let you take her away from us." A long silence loomed through the air as the two students stared at the criminal and his underling. After a while, Nasamiri rubbed the bridge of his nose and said, "I don't think you two understand what I said to you earlier. Eri is my granddaughter. I am her only living relative. Legally, she belongs with me." "Oh, believe us, we understood," Midoriya said, uncharacteristically dark and looming. "We know she's your granddaughter and we know she legally belongs with you." His expression turned darker, somehow. "But do you honestly think we would give her up to you, a known head of the Yakuza gang of villains? A man who turned his own flesh and blood over to a bunch of criminals so that they could do experiments on her?" IzuOcha stated, her glare as dark as Midoriya's. "A man who knew the monster that he not only took under his wing, but also performed horrid experiment on a little girl. And you expect us to believe that you'll put her in a safer place?" Midoriya asked as he clenched his fists in anger. "You'll probably just leave her in the hands of others who just want to experiment on her even more. So if you think we're just going to accept your dirty money and give Eri away, then you don't know us at all." Nasamiri's once soft gaze changed into an angry glare. "I would be careful with what you say next." He growled deeply. "I am not asking you. I am telling you, if you do not give me my granddaughter, I will." "That is enough," Nezu said finally as he stood up from his chair and onto the table. "I will not tolerate any threats made to my students, and I must agree with Mr. Midoriya and Ms. IzuOcha," he added as he slowly made his way to Nasamiri. "You may be Eri's legitimate family member, but you are also a criminal. The police entrusted you a high school to look after Eri and, thus, protect her from any harm that may come to her. In turn, I entrusted Mr. Midoriya and Ms. IzuOcha to look after her and care for her. And from what I have heard from their fellow classmates and Eri's teacher, they have done a much better job in raising her than you or anyone else from your organization had ever done." Tough talk coming from a flea-infested, walking, talking, rodent freak, Watanabe finally said in a deep, menacing voice. "This coming from the human gorilla," Nezu retorted, brushing the insult off as if it were dust on his suit. He smirked. "Sure, you could try and have your assistant kill the three of us, Mr. Nasamiri." He turned his attention back to the crime lord. "But I will remind you that this school houses some of the finest future heroes as well as many current pros who would be more than capable of taking you both down in an instant. And 1 or 2 students aren't against killing a criminal. He shrugged, making a slight reference to Bakugou. So do us all a favor. Take your filthy money, take your lackey, and get off this campus. Watanabe gnashed his teeth together, but Naoshimori held up a hand to silence him. Without another word, Watanabe placed both briefcases on his back and pushed his boss wheelchair away from the table. As they reached the door, however, Naoshimori shot one last look of hatred toward Midoriya and IzuOcha. You'll both regret not taking me up on my offer, he growled through gritted teeth. This isn't over. And with that, the crime boss and his lackey exited the room. A few seconds of silence passed in the room as Midoriya, IzuOcha, and Nezu's eyes were still fixated on the door. Soon, though, their expressions soon softened and Midoriya and IzuOcha fell back into their seats. You both did the right thing, Nezu said as he stood in front of them. It takes true love and care of a person to deny an offer that incredible. Yeah, Midoriya said, but what do we do now? We just made enemies with a Yakuza boss who's Iri's grandfather. I do have a few suggestions, Nezu said. First, it might be best to have Iri spend some nights in Ms. IzuOcha's room from time to time so as to not have her sleeping quarters be routine. Second, it would best to not let Iri go off campus for the rest of the month, lest someone tries to abduct her. Perhaps let her have playdates with Satsuki at your dormitory. Finally, it would be best not to tell Iri about what was discussed here today. She is still recovering from her experience and we would not want any old wounds to open up. If all of those seem reasonable, you are both dismissed and may head back to your dormitory. Midoriya and IzuOcha nodded. Those did seem like fair suggestions. With that, they packed up their belongings and made their way out of the room. I meant what I said earlier, Nezu said warmly as the students reached the door, about how you two are raising Iri so well. Even though it may be a while until Iri fully heals mentally, she seems to enjoy her life thanks to you two and the rest of Class 1A. Midoriya and IzuOcha both smiled at the principal for his kind words, and with that, they exited the room. I just hope they remember that Iri's stay is only temporary, Nezu thought sadly as he watched them leave. Neither Midoriya nor IzuOcha spoke another word about the incident until they got to the 1A dormitory. We should probably tell the others about this so that they know what's going on, Midoriya said. Agreed, IzuOcha responded. But we should wait until after we put Iri to bed. Midoriya nodded, and with that, both students entered the building, met by the rest of their classmates. What happened? Momo asked in concern. We heard that you both went to the principal's office. Was it about the hot sauce incident? Minda asked nervously. Did it have something to do with your grades? Ada asked with annoyance. I know you like spending time with Iri, but if you both wish to become heroes, your grades must come first. Mama, Papa, a small voice asked. The class parted to reveal Iri, who was staring up at Midoriya and IzuOcha with concern. What's wrong? Both students smiled softly as IzuOcha placed her hand on Iri's head. It's nothing, sweetie, she replied. Have you eaten yet? When the little girl shook her head, IzuOcha took her hand and led her into the kitchen. Midoriya started to follow, but not before turning to his fellow classmates with a look of seriousness on his face. IzuOcha and I will explain everything later, he said quietly so as to not let Iri hear him. We're asking that you all wait until Iri has been put to bed. And with that, he took his leave. The rest of the evening continued without any incidents. After dinner, IzuOcha asked Iri if she would like to spend a few nights in her room as a nice change of pace. Iri was more than happy to sleep in IzuOcha's room from time to time, whispering to her that there was only so much All Might memorabilia a person could see. At around 8 p.m., IzuOcha and Midoriya took Iri upstairs to bed. After tucking her in, they each gave her a goodnight kiss before they closed the door. After the easy part of the evening was done, they made their way down the stairs until they reached the living room, where they found the rest of Class 1A staring back at them. So, Bakugou said in an annoyed tone, are you going to tell us what happened or not? And with that, Midoriya and IzuOcha quietly told them everything, careful to not wake Iri. They talked about Naoshimori and that he was Iri's grandfather, how he offered them 120 million yen each in exchange for Iri, how they rejected his offer, and how he threatened them before he left. As they finished their story, they glanced around to see mixed reactions. Ada, Shadow, and a few others were shaking their heads in either shock or disgust. Momo, Mina, Aoyama, Tsuyu, and others had a hand over their mouths in shock. Minta and a few just stood there with blank expressions on their faces. Bakugou and Kirishima, on the other hand, were clenching their fists in anger. Goddamn bastard, Bakugou snarled, thinking that a little kid could be easily bought. You should have slammed his face into a wall, Deku. He directed his glare at Midoriya. We didn't want things to get out of hand, Kaken, Midoriya said calmly. Besides, if we did attack Naoshimori, we would be proving that we're no better than him. Bakugou only replied with a scoff. Though I will agree with the principal, Ida said as he placed a hand on Midoriya and IzuOcha's shoulders. You both did the right thing not accepting that money. At this, the rest of the class nodded in agreement. So what do we do now about Iri? Mina asked with concern. Nezu told us that it would be best to keep an eye on Iri and her surroundings for the time being. IzuOcha said. He also said to not let her off campus for the rest of the month at least. If she wants to spend time with friends like Satsuki, then they can hang out here, she added as she glanced at Tsuyu, who nodded. But the two of us cannot do this alone, Midoriya chimed in. We need all of you to help out in any way you can. After the simulation joint and training camp invasions, we can't be too careful. Nashimiri has powerful connections in the underworld. Heck, Overhaul had connections with the League of Villains. We have to be on guard. All the other students nodded in agreement. By angering the former head of the organization that held Eri captive, they had just made a whole new list of enemies. Now then, Ida said after a while, I'm sure the two of you are exhausted after what happened. I would thus suggest that you both head up to bed. Midoriya and Uraraka both nodded. It had indeed been a rough day for them. Silently, they made their way upstairs. When they made it to the second floor, Midoriya turned to Uraraka. Hey Uraraka, he said, mind if I accompany you to your room? It was then that Uraraka's face turned a bright shade of pink. Noticing what she may have interpreted from what he said, Midoriya's face turned equally dark as he waved his hands back and forth nervously. JJ just wanted TTT to check on Eri. That's all, he stammered. At this explanation, Uraraka calmed down. She nodded and they both made their way up the stairs. When they reached Uraraka's room, they opened the door slowly so as to not wake Eri up. They glanced in to see her curled up under her blanket, cuddling up with the Midoriya plushie that Momo had made for her a week ago. The memory of that day still brought a smile to both Midoriya's and Uraraka's faces. When Koji had shown Eri the teddy bear and giraffe plushies in his room, he offered to let her have one of them. When she kindly refused, Momo offered to make one for her of her choosing. After thinking for a while, Eri asked if she could make a plushie of Midoriya, which was followed by a collection of DAAAWs from the girls. Midoriya, at that time, didn't know whether to blush in embarrassment or cry tears of joy. Midoriya and Uraraka couldn't help but smile. They may have made a new enemy in Shinobu Nashimiri, but that would be an issue for another time. Right now, Eri was safe and happy with her life and with people who loved and cared for her. As they continued to watch Eri smile in her sleep, they remembered another reason why they turned down Nashimiri's offer. She may have been worth only 240 million yen to him, but to Midoriya and Uraraka she was priceless. December 18th. Keep up, Eri, we're nearly there, Uraraka said as the little girl's head swiveled around in amazement at the decorations hanging between the skyscrapers of Tokyo. It was the middle of December and everyone was in a festive mood. Large, multicolored paper balls hung in the air on wires. Projection cameras displayed snowflakes, snowmen, and other Christmassy decorations against the sides of buildings. And window shoppers stood in awe as they watched the Christmas-themed displays set up by big-name shopping stores. On this particular day, Eri and her parents were heading into the city to pick up a Christmas cake for the Class 1 holiday party on Christmas Eve. Being confined to a small, dark cell for a majority of her life, Eri rarely saw such a wide variety of colors and shapes, so it was understandable that her gaze flitted back and forth between everything she saw, trying to take it all in and not miss a single thing. Midoriya and Uraraka smiled fondly at Eri's sense of awe and wonder. It was so cute to see the little 6-year-old see so many new, fascinating things. After crossing a couple more blocks, the three of them arrived at a small bakery nestled between a bookstore and a pharmacy. The structure was wooden and the entire window display was filled with delicious cakes and pies. As soon as they entered, the scent of sweets hit them like an aromatic firework. Besides the glass cases displaying what the shop had to offer, there are also little toy planes with Santas inside that flew around the room, a ceramic village with a toy train, and holly that hung from the ceiling. Hey Uraraka, Midoriya said as Eri's wonder-filled gaze continued to drink in all of the sights. If you get the cake, I can watch Eri. Sounds good. Uraraka walked up to the counter where an elderly woman was kneading dough. Hi, Uraraka greeted and the woman looked up from her work and smiled warmly at her. My name's Uraraka Achako. My friend, Ashido Mina, ordered a cake for our party. Ah yes, the woman said as she used a towel to clean her hands. We just finished it yesterday. I'll be back with it in a few minutes. As the old lady went into a secluded part of the shop, Uraraka turned to see Midoriya crouching next to Eri and pointing at the various cakes and sweets. She silently giggled as Eri's eyes glistened with happiness and her mouth watered. Uraraka glanced at Midoriya and couldn't help but smile fondly at him. It had been almost 3 months since Class 1 had accepted Eri into their lives, and Midoriya was proving to be a better father figure to her than anyone could have ever imagined. Uraraka felt extremely lucky that she was given the opportunity to share all of Eri's adventures with him. Is he your boyfriend? The sudden question caused Uraraka to blush a violent shade of pink as she spun around to see an old man with their Christmas cake and a smile on his face. No, she babbled as she waved her hands back and forth frantically. He's just friend. I mean, we aren't even. Forgive my husband, the old lady said as she playfully smacked the old man's shoulder. He's got the blood of a romantic coursing through his veins. She smiled as IzuOcha composed herself, inspected the cake, withdrew the money that Wana had pulled together from her pocket, and handed it to the couple. How long have you two been together? IzuOcha asked curiously. Nearly 60 years, the old lady said as she looked at her husband affectionately. And after 5 children, 8 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren, it's safe to say we would do it all over again in a heartbeat if given the chance. IzuOcha couldn't help but smile at how sweet it sounded. After a few seconds, she made her way to Midoriya and Eri, who were still looking at the confectionery selections. Mission accomplished, she announced. Shall we head back home? Midoriya and Eri nodded. It was getting close to dinner time anyway. As they made their way to the door, however, the old man called out to them and handed a candy roll encased in festive wrapping. Something for the little one, he said as he smiled warmly at Eri. Eri returned his smile as she took the candy and unwrapped it. It was a soft caramel chew with a thick cream in the center. As she took a nibble, the sweet mixture of the two caused her taste buds to dance in pure delight. It was almost as good as the candy apple Midoriya had given her at the cultural festival. Thank you, she said with a bright smile as she took a hold of Midoriya and IzuOcha's hands, and they all left the store. As they watched them leave, the elderly woman couldn't help but chuckle a bit. It's funny really, she said as her husband raised an eyebrow with curiosity. The way she looks at that boy is rather familiar. Her husband nodded in agreement as he looked at her fondly. Indeed, he said, it's the same way you look at me every day. The old woman smiled, giving him a quick peck on the lips. December 19th. So what are you gonna give your parents for Christmas, Eri? Satsuki asked her friend as they finished drawing their arts and crafts projects. It was the last day of school before Christmas vacation and everyone was buzzing with excitement about where they were going and what they were hoping to get. Monoma Miki kept bragging about how her parents were taking her to the Hawaiian Islands for Christmas and how they would be staying in the penthouse of the most expensive hotel in the state just so they could literally look down at those beneath them. Kendo Akihito, whose parents were history fans, was going to Izuocha for the holidays. Satsuki was going to be spending Christmas with her brother and parents. Fortunately, Sui was able to convince them to let Satsuki attend Wane's Christmas party on Christmas Eve. I'm not sure, Eri said worriedly. She hadn't thought about getting her mama and papa a Christmas present. I really don't have any money, so I can't buy anything. Why not something homemade? Satsuki suggested. Sis says that the best gifts to give are the ones you make yourself. Taking in her friend's advice, Eri pondered what she could make for Midoriya and IzuOcha. As her eyes moved around the classroom, they fell on something near the door. She smiled widely at the idea and raced over to get started. December 20th. Midoriya, IzuOcha, and Eri were at the Ginza shopping mall in downtown Tokyo waiting in a long line along with various other families. Nina had insisted that Eri should visit Santa Claus and tell him what she wanted for Christmas, and even though it would probably take a while to actually see Santa, Midoriya and IzuOcha thought it would be a wonderful idea. Now standing in line waiting to see St. Nicholas, Eri was jumping up and down excitedly as the line got shorter and shorter. Now remember, Eri, IzuOcha said as she crouched down to Eri's eye level. When you get up there, he'll ask if you've been good or bad and you answer truthfully. Then, when he asks you what you want, you tell. Okay. Eri could only nod her head up and down in excitement. Come on, how long does it take to ask the fat guy what you want for Christmas? The man behind the three called out. Make up your mind. Midoriya and IzuOcha shook their heads. The man had done nothing but complain the whole time he was there. He complained about the line, the kids that were scared of Santa, the kids that took too long to give an answer, anything that could be even a minor annoyance. He jumped at that moment, nearly everyone in line was giving him a look of either annoyance or disgust. After 5 minutes, it was Eri's turn to see the guest of honor. The man on the elevated platform appeared to be in his late 50s with a round belly and rosy cheeks. His eyes twinkled wisely. His laughter and speech were booming and excited all the children. Ho ho ho. He laughed as he picked Eri up and placed her on his lap. And what's your name, little one? Eri, Mr. Klaus, she said with a smile on her face. Eri, Santa asked with a hearty chuckle. What an adorable name for a girl. And have you been good this year? At this, Eri began to think back. There was that incident with Mickey whom she got into a tussle with at school. There was also the time she carelessly spilled juice over the floor and Ada told her off. Hey kid, the guy in line called out. Answer the stupid question already, will ya? Some of us would like to get this done and over with. At this, a tic started to form on both Midoriya and IzuOcha's heads. Well, Eri said as she looked up at Santa, I haven't been bad, but I haven't been good either. I see, Santa said with a kind nod. Well, not every child is perfect, Eri. So what would you like for Christmas this year? Again, Eri began to think. There were so many things to ask for, but the one thing she really wanted was, hey, say the wish already. Both IzuOcha and Midoriya were almost stretched to the breaking point as the jerk kept complaining. Worried that she was making people impatient, Eri motioned to Santa to lean in closer, to which he complied. She then whispered something in his ear and his eyes crinkled as he smiled at her. I'll see what I can do. Well then, have a great day and a Merry Christmas, Eri. Thanks, Santa, the little girl said as she bounced off his lap and took a hold of Midoriya and Uraraka's hands. About damn time, the jerk in line mumbled as the family passed by. Little brat wasting everyone's time on some stupid wish. Unfortunately for him, those words were just loud enough for Midoriya to hear, who stopped dead in his tracks. Excuse me, girls, he said to both Uraraka and Eri. I'll be right back. As the girls looked at him in confusion, Midoriya casually made his way over to the man and tapped his shoulder. Excuse me, sir. Yeah, what do you? Pow, crash. Once the dust had settled, it took everyone a few seconds to register what had happened. Sure enough, the jerk was lying in the makeshift fireplace with his eyes swirling around, knocked out. Midoriya's middle finger was smoking, too, as if he had used his quirk to send the man flying into the fireplace. As the rest of the people in line watched in shock, Midoriya calmly walked up to Santa and muttered something like sorry about the mess. Then, he came up to Eri and Uraraka and said, now we can go. And with Eri giggling and Uraraka shaking her head in humorous annoyance, the three of them left for home. December 21st. Eri smiled as she, Akihito, and Satsuki clung to Tsuyu as she leapt from building to building. Today happened to be her birthday and she was going to celebrate it with her new family. Earlier in the week, Midoriya and Uraraka explained that since her birthday was so close to Christmas, it would be best for her to receive her presents on Christmas instead. Fortunately for them, Eri was very understanding. She even mentioned that she didn't want a big celebration, just a nice dinner with Akihito and Satsuki to come over and play. She figured that Christmas was a hectic time of year and she didn't want to add more stress onto her mama and papa. After a few more minutes, Eri, Tsuyu, and Satsuki arrived at Alliance Heights. As soon as they entered, several of the students, including Midoriya and Uraraka, smiled upon seeing Eri. For the next few hours, Eri, Akihito, and Satsuki played with Eri's numerous toys, talked about what they were hoping to get for Christmas, and wondered what the Christmas party would be like. At around 6, Eri's favorite dinner was served, dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets with French-cut green beans on the side. As soon as dinner was over, Mina dimmed the lights in the kitchen. Soon, Ida came out of the kitchen carrying something that had 7 lit candles sticking out of it. As soon as he came into view, the rest of Class 1A, Akihito, and Satsuki began singing, Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, as Ida set the object down in front of Eri. Her eyes widened and she grinned widely at what she saw. It was a birthday cake with vanilla frosting and a colored syrup drawing of All Might. Happy birthday, dear Eri. Happy birthday to you. As soon as the song was over, Eri reached for the cake with excitement. Not yet, sweetie, Uraraka said before Eri could even touch the frosting. Noticing his friend's confusion, Akihito said, first, you make a wish for only yourself to know. Then you blow out the candles. And if you blow them all out, it'll come true, Satsuki chimed in with a smile. Upon hearing this, Eri began to ponder what wish she wanted to come true. There were so many things, like owning a puppy or a kitty, receiving a box full of candy apples, or getting a giant stuffed teddy bear. Suddenly, her eyes sparkled as she thought up the perfect wish. Taking in a deep breath, Eri leaned forward and blew out all the candles on her cake. The entire room erupted into cheers as party poppers went off and showered Eri with colorful streamers. After that, the rest of the evening was uneventful. If you didn't count the part where Midoriya was mortified when he saw Bakugou viciously eating his slice of All Might's face. Soon, 8 o'clock came around and Tsuyu left with a sleeping Satsuki in her arms. Akihito was picked up a few minutes later by IzuOcha, who wished Eri a happy birthday before they left. As they made their way to the stairs so that Eri could get ready for bed, Midoriya and Uraraka noticed that she was looking down at the ground with a dismal look on her face. Eri, Midoriya asked with concern. Sweetheart, what's the matter? Was the celebration not good? No, Papa, it was great. It's just, Eri said as she cast her eyes down to the floor again. Well, I made that wish when I blew out the candles ... but it didn't come true. Midoriya and Uraraka's eyes widened in both shock and sadness. They had forgotten that Eri might have taken what Satsuki and Akihito had both said to heart. 1,000 thoughts raced through their minds as they tried to think of a logical explanation. Mashura suddenly said as he snapped his fingers, having overheard the little girl's distress. He turned to Eri and said, wait here, I'll be right back. And like that, he ran up the stairs, leaving Midoriya, Uraraka, and Eri to all share a look of confusion. A few minutes later, he returned with a small, rectangular, wooden box. I knew this would come in handy one day, he said as he tried to catch his breath from running. What is it? Eri asked with intrigue. Mashura smiled as he displayed the box in all its glory. This, Eri, is a wishing box. A wishing box? She asked with a raised eyebrow. That's right, he said. This box is meant to store wishes. You whisper your wish into the box so that nobody else can hear it. Once you close the lid, the box will hold onto your wish until it finally comes true. But won't that waste the wishes you've already made? Yuri asked with concern and worry. I've never used it before, Mashirao said with a chuckle. I figured it could be put to better use by someone else. Go ahead, try it, he added as he lifted the lid ever so slightly. As Yuri's eyes sparkled with delight, she leaned forward and opened her mouth to speak when she glanced back at Midoriya and IzuOcha. They, in turn, faced away from her and playfully covered their ears. Smiling with satisfaction, Yuri whispered something into the box. As she pulled away, Mashirao snapped the box shut before stowing it in his back pocket. I'll hold onto it just so it doesn't get lost or someone ends up throwing it away, he explained. Yuri nodded and then hugged Mashirao with a huge smile. Thanks, Uncle Mashi, she said. No problem, kiddo, Mashirao said as he returned the hug. His eyes then looked up at Midoriya and IzuOcha, who were both giving him silent thank yous. Mashirao responded with a thumbs up. Unbeknownst to the small group, Hagakure saw everything and gave an invisible blush at the thought of Mashirao being so good with kids. She sighed dreamily at the thought of having little invisible or visible kids with the man before she silently continued her way up the stairs to her room. December 22nd. It was early in the afternoon when Midoriya came face to face with both Mr. Aizawa and IzuOcha outside his bedroom door. Is there something wrong, Mr. Aizawa? Midoriya asked a little nervously. No, Aizawa said in an apathetic tone of voice. I just wanted to let you both know that there are some people downstairs who want to talk to you. And with that, he took his leave. Midoriya glanced at IzuOcha and noticed that she shared the same quizzical look as him. Breathing deeply, they both made their way down to the first floor. Achako, sweetie, it's been too long. There's my little peanut. Izuku, my baby. Look how much you've grown. The cries from the people that stood before them caused both Midoriya and IzuOcha to smile widely as they ran and embraced them tightly. Mom, Dad, I've missed you both so much, IzuOcha said as her parents flashed identical grins at her. Mom, what are you doing here? Midoriya asked as he wrapped his arms around his mother. Well, I got off work early today, Inko said as she gave her son a warm smile, and I was in the area, so I figured that I might as well stop by and say hello. And construction has been put on hold due to the impending snowstorm, so your mother and I decided to visit you, Mr. IzuOcha said to his daughter. His eyes soon fell on Midoriya and he walked over and stuck out his hand. So you're the Deku boy, huh? He asked. Why yes sir, Midoriya said, slightly intimidated by the man's bulky physique. But actually, it's Midoriya. I see, Mr. IzuOcha said. Well, it's a pleasure to finally meet you, boy, he exclaimed wholeheartedly. Indeed, Mrs. IzuOcha said as Midoriya took Mr. IzuOcha's hand and shook it. Our little Achako has told us so much about you. You told your parents about me? Midoriya asked as he looked at IzuOcha. Her cheeks turned bright red at the question. Maybe one or two things, she responded meekly. Excuse me, Inko said as she looked at IzuOcha, but you wouldn't happen to be the girl my Izuku has told me about so much, would you? I guess so, IzuOcha said nervously as she bowed to Inko. Either way, it's nice to meet you, Mrs. Midoriya. I'm Achako IzuOcha. It's a pleasure to meet you too, dear, Inko said with a smile. From what Izuku's told me, it would seem you two share a deep connect. Say, I have an idea, Midoriya exclaimed suddenly with a beet red face. Why don't you three take a seat in IzuOcha and I will get refreshments? As the adults took their respective seats in the living room, Midoriya and IzuOcha began to prep some tea and water. All the while, neither one of them glanced at each other as they both shared a pinkish hue on their faces. Hello. The sound of a small and familiar voice caused Midoriya and IzuOcha to turn their heads and see Yuri staring at their parents, all of whom wore a mixture of surprise and confusion on their faces. It was at that moment that both students came to a horrible realization. Oh crap, they both thought. I forgot to tell my parents, about ERI. Izuku, Inko asked as she glanced up at her son. Does UA have a daycare program? No. Midoriya stuttered as both he and IzuOcha shook like leaves. I live here, Yuri chimed in as she kept her distance from the three adults she had never met before. Oh how nice, Mrs. IzuOcha said even though she still sounded confused. I'm sorry to ask, Mr. IzuOcha began as he continued to look at Yuri. But who are your parents? And before Midoriya and IzuOcha could even stop her, Yuri raised her arm and pointed her index finger at them. A sudden silence loomed over the living room and kitchen as the little girl's gesture sank in. Midoriya and IzuOcha made no movement nor speech in fear of setting one of their parents off. For a few minutes, nobody made a sound while Yuri looked around in confusion until WNIHH. Inko cried out in pure terror as tears poured out of her eyes like waterfalls. I had a feeling this would happen. Letting my son live in a co-ed dorm. I didn't want to think it at first, but now it's evident. My baby boy's a gigolo. What? Midoriya exclaimed in a panic as his face turned beet red. No mom. It's not like that. It's just he immediately stopped when he heard a menacing growl coming from behind him. As Midoriya slowly turned around, his eyes widened in terror as he looked into the deathly glare of Mr. IzuOcha. Almost instantly, Midoriya scampered away from him until his back hit the wall. "You little punk," Mr. IzuOcha said as he cracked his knuckles and moved slowly towards the boy. "I'm gonna make you pay for defiling my baby girl." "Dad, no, don't kill him," IzuOcha yelled as she leaped forward and grabbed her father by the waist in the hopes of holding him back. Unfortunately, it was to no avail as Mr. IzuOcha's superior build and determination outmatched IzuOcha's, and the gravity user's feet were dragged on the floor as she clung to her father's waist. "Mrs. Midoriya," she said as she directed her attention to the hysterical woman while still trying to hold her father back. "Please, WEN never. I mean we didn't." The banter between the four echoed throughout the dormitory. Most of the students who heard were tempted to help, but decided against it so as to not worsen the situation. Even Bakugou, who was annoyed by the yelling and crying, knew from experience not to reason with a hysterical Inko Midoriya. IzuOcha, Inko, Mr. IzuOcha, and Midoriya were so wrapped up in their antics that they didn't notice Mrs. IzuOcha sucking in a lungful of air and placing 2 fingers in her mouth. "Wheee." The whistle that emitted from Mrs. IzuOcha's mouth was so loud the others had to cover their ears to deafen the noise. Once the whistling had ceased, the others turned to a stern Mrs. IzuOcha, who pointed a finger at the corner of the living room. IzuOcha and Midoriya's eyes fell onto where she pointed and gave a small gasp as they saw Eri huddled in the corner, rocking back and forth and crying. "I messed up," Eri mumbled through tears. Everyone's mad because of me. I ruined everything." Midoriya and IzuOcha began to make their way to her, but were stopped by Mrs. IzuOcha, who had held out her hand and shot a glare at both of them. As the 2 students backed away slightly, Mrs. IzuOcha lowered her hand and slowly walked over to Eri. There, she said softly as she crouched down and placed a gentle hand on Eri's head. "It's all right. Nobody's upset with you. There's just a bit of a misunderstanding. That's all." "So," Eri said as she sniffled a bit with tears still in her eyes. "You're not mad at me?" "No, of course not, dear," Mrs. IzuOcha said. "You did nothing wrong. Here," she added as she pulled out a handkerchief and wiped Eri's tears away. She then picked the little girl up and held her close to her chest as she rubbed Eri's back in a circular motion to soothe her. Soon Eri began to calm down and ceased to cry. "Better?" Mrs. IzuOcha asked with a small smile, to which Eri nodded silently. "Now then," Mrs. IzuOcha said as her gaze fell on the others. "If we could all have a seat and act rationally, I'm sure there's a logical reason to all of this if we just let Ochako and Midoriya explain. Ochako, here," she added as she handed Eri back to IzuOcha, who gave the little girl a kiss on the head to ensure her that she was not to blame. With that said, Inko and the IzuOchas sat down on one couch while Midoriya and IzuOcha sat across from them on the other couch. "Now," Mrs. IzuOcha said once everyone had settled, "how about you 2 start from the beginning?" And with that, Midoriya and IzuOcha told their parents everything. Midoriya running into Eri, the mission to rescue her, battling Overhaul and the 8 precepts of death, losing Sir Night-Eye, and Nezu granting Midoriya temporary guardianship over Eri. Once they had completed their story, they saw their parents with mixtures of shock and sadness on their faces. "My," Inko said, staring at Izuku. That's certainly a lot to take in. But I'm still confused," Mr. IzuOcha said as he glanced back and forth at the 2 students. "Why does she call you 2 her mama and papa?" "Well, our friend Ada had a theory behind that," Midoriya explained. "The thing is, Eri's never really had any positive parental role models in her life. She was surrounded by people who either didn't care about her or lied to her. Due to the fact that she ran into me when she tried to escape and I helped save her, she automatically saw me as the father figure she never really had. So, she calls me her papa. The same for me," IzuOcha chimed in. "Since I helped rescue her and I was the first female figure to show her kindness when she arrived here, she immediately saw me as a mother figure and, as a result, calls me her mama." "I see," Mr. IzuOcha said with a sigh of relief as the matter was cleared. "So you both have to take care of Eri by yourselves?" Mrs. IzuOcha asked. "Not entirely," Midoriya said. "Even though I'm technically in charge of her well-being, IzuOcha does her fair share of raising Eri." Fortunately for IzuOcha, he had failed to notice the smile that grew on her face at his words. "And even our classmates help out as well," he added as he used his fingers to count off. "Kirishima cooks her breakfast every other day. Tsuyu takes her to and from school and sets up playdates with her sister Satsuki. Yaoyorozu reads her a bedtime story every night. Ida and Todoroki help her with her homework. Heck, even Mashurao gives Eri fighting lessons in case she can't use her quirk." The sense of confidence that emulated from both Midoriya and IzuOcha started to falter, however, when they noticed their parents were looking at each other and sharing a look of concern on each of their faces. "What?" IzuOcha asked. Listen, we all know you two mean well, Mr. Uraraka said slowly as the adults looked back at the student. But we just feel uncomfortable about the fact that you two are still in high school. And yet the principal has placed you in charge of a child who is about half your age. Even with the help you both receive from your classmates, raising a child is not an easy task. Exactly, Inko said in agreement. And what happens if she gets sick or hurt? Do you two know what to do in a situation like that? Do you know how to discipline her if she ever gets out of line? Do you two know how to? Mom, stop, Midoriya said with an aura of frustration and seriousness, causing his mother to stop talking. I get why you're all worried about this situation. But it wasn't just Principal Nezu's decision to put me in charge of Eri. It was also my choice as well. Sir Night died trying to save Eri and make this world a little less dark. I owe him a debt that I may never be able to repay. Do you know what his last words were before he died? He said society needs smiles, laughs, and energy to bring about a brighter future. Every time I do something that makes Eri either laugh or smile, it's as though his last wish is being fulfilled. He then glanced down at Eri with a smile before saying, and I am more than willing to help raise Eri if it means accomplishing that. Mom, Dad, Uraraka said as her attention turned to her parents. Do you remember the time when we went to the park and I tried to defend that little boy from those bullies right before Dad stepped in? You told me to always do what I thought was right, no matter what. And if that means giving Eri love, affection, and someone to call her mama, then I am more than willing to do it because it's what I feel is right. As their children finished their speeches, the Urarakas and Inko couldn't help but smile a little at how much they had grown up since they began attending UA. It amazed them that these were the same children that they read bedtime stories to and comforted them when they needed it. Interesting, Mrs. Uraraka said. Well, the three of us may still be unsure about this whole situation, but if you two feel that what you are doing is right, then we wouldn't intervene. Thank you, Uraraka said as both she and Midoriya smiled at their parents. Now that that's said and done, how about I make that pot of tea? Mr. Uraraka asked as he made his way to the kitchen. Oh, and Midoriya. Yes, sir. I think my daughter would like her hand back, if you don't mind. Confused, both Midoriya and Uraraka looked down, only for their eyes to widen at what he meant. At some point during their counter-arguments, the two of them had managed to link their hands together without either one of them noticing. A light shade of pink covered their faces as they retracted said hand and yelped sorry. Inko and Mrs. Uraraka smiled sweetly at how adorable their children reacted toward each other while Eri could only look on in confusion. The rest of the visit went fairly well. Midoriya and Uraraka told them about what they had learned and how they were honing their skills as heroes in training. Eri told them about what she was learning in school, to which Inko and Mrs. Uraraka were impressed by. She even showed a few of her toys to Mr. Uraraka, who was more than willing to play with her after the whole fiasco. Soon, however, it was time for the parents to leave. As they gathered up their coats and winter boots, Eri motioned for Inko to lean forward. As she did, the little girl whispered something in her ear. The older woman smiled as she rose up and said, I'll see if I have any that might work. To which Eri smiled in kind. It was great to see you, sweetie, Mrs. Uraraka said as she gave her daughter a tight hug. And it was good to see you too, Midoriya. Indeed, Mr. Uraraka said in agreement. And again, sorry about threatening you earlier. It's all right, Midoriya said. There was just a lack of information. Be sure to call me on Christmas, will you? Inko asked her son. You know I will, Mom. He smiled. Inko smiled too as she stood up on tiptoes and gave Midoriya a peck on the cheek. Bye. The three adults called out as they made their way to their cars. Bye. Midoriya and Uraraka called back as they waved. Go on, Eri, Uraraka said to the little girl holding her hand. Say goodbye. Waving her little hand, Eri called out goodbye, Grandma and Grandpa. Goodbye, Grandma. At these words, Midoriya and Uraraka froze in shock and the adults whipped their heads up in surprise. Suokuliao and Christmas. Bye, Mom and Dad. Midoriya and Uraraka cried out in hasty terror as they slammed the door shut and slumped to the floor in exhaustion. December 23rd. Hey, Eri, Kaminari said as Eri's head perked up from her book. Wanna help me and Gyro decorate the Christmas tree? Sure, Eri exclaimed excitedly as she raced over to the electricity and earphone jack users. She soon stopped at a bare fir tree with a box of assorted Christmas lights and ornaments. So how are we gonna do this? Kaminari asked as he placed a hand on his chin. Maybe we could untangle all the lights, plug them in, and then wrap them around the tree. Plugging them in would either cause a short fuse or run the electricity cost up, Gyro said as she rolled her eyes at him. You untangle those wires while Eri and I separate the ornaments from heaviest to lightest. With that, Gyro began removing all of the boxes that contained the heavy ornaments while Eri gathered all the ones containing the lighter ornaments. As they placed them well away from Kaminari and the Christmas lights, Eri noticed that there were a variety of different colors and shapes. As she and Gyro began sorting and picking out which ones to put on the tree, Eri noticed some of the small ornaments were actually fairly heavy and some of the medium to large ones were hollow and light. "Hey Kaminari," Gyro stated after a good 30 minutes, "you done untangling the lights?" Almost," Kaminari said hesitantly. "I may have hit a slight snag, though." "What are you?" Gyro couldn't finish her sentence for she had just glanced up to see Kaminari in an awkward position. At some point, he had wrapped himself up in the Christmas lights. His legs were attached together and it looked like he couldn't move them. His arms were also wrapped to his sides, making it difficult to move them as well. Even his face was covered in the festive lights. Shaking her head while Eri giggled a bit, Gyro said maybe we should just ditch the tree and hang the ornaments on you. As Gyro turned her back to the electricity user, Kaminari glanced down at Eri and motioned for her to come closer. "Hey Eri," he said when she did, "wanna see something cool?" As soon as Eri nodded, Kaminari freed his right hand from his confines and activated his quirk at a low setting. He then reached up and placed 2 fingers on a wire that was touching his right cheek. Instantly, the red bulb that was on his nose flickered on and off. Upon seeing Kaminari's trick, Eri could help but burst out laughing at how he looked like a certain red-nosed reindeer. Anti-Gyro, she said through her fits of laughter. "Uncle Kami's just like Rudolph." Gyro looked at Kaminari with a deadpan look on her face and glanced away. He's like a child, she thought. Not only that, but he's also a pervert and an idiot most of the time. Hearing Eri's continued laugh, however, Gyro couldn't help but smile a little out of view of the others. But he means well, and when he's not an idiot or a pervert, he's a nice guy. Who knows? He might even be a good fath. She snapped back to reality before she could even finish that thought. Realizing that her cheeks were slightly warm at the thought of Kaminari being a father, Gyro accidentally activated her quirk and stabbed him in the head, earning a cry of pain from the electricity user and a gasp from Eri. After the Christmas tree was decorated and Eri had a PB&J sandwich and cut up apple for lunch, Midoriya and IzuOcha suggested that they all go outside and enjoy the snow. The others agreed. It would be nice to get out of the house since they were all on vacation. Besides, it had been a while since Eri had actually played in the snow. As the other students began dressing for the extreme conditions, Midoriya and IzuOcha fitted Eri into her snow pants, snow boots, winter coat, mittens, scarf, and winter hat. When asked if she was ready to head outside, Eri could only give a small thumbs up with her mitten. As Eri in Class 1 walked outside, the little girl's eyes sparkled with wonder at the snow falling from the sky. She stuck her hand and watched with delight as a snowflake gently landed on it and melted upon contact. Midoriya and IzuOcha chuckled a bit at the aura of adorableness Eri was emitting. "Hey Eri," Mina said excitedly, "try catching them with your tongue. It's fun." She then proceeded to stick out her tongue until a snowflake landed on it. Eri followed suit and, soon enough, a snowflake landed on her tongue. "Needs more sugar, Auntie," she said innocently. "Snowball fight." Minta cried out as he gathered ammo. "Absolutely not," Ada said sternly. "Snowball fights are dangerous, childish, and are a bad influence on the younger genera." His sentence was interrupted as Minta had taken the opportunity to hit him in the face with one. As the snow slid off his face, Ada's eyes darkened. "It is on." He gathered some snow to make his own. Soon, everyone in Class 1 was hurling snowballs left and right, not caring who they hit. "Stay close to me, sweetie," Ochako said as a snowball sailed inches above her only to come into contact with Sato. Eri nodded vigorously as she watched the projectiles whiz around her in every direction. "Got you now, round face," a hauntingly familiar voice called out. Both girls turned around to see Bakugou charging toward them with a snowball in his hand and an evil grin on his face. Ochako looked around trying to find another snowball, but she used her last one on Mina. Thinking fast, she lifted Eri up and held her out in front of her. Seeing this, Bakugou planted his heels firmly into the snow, skidding to a halt mere inches from the little girl's face. "Hey, no fair, round face," Bakugou yelled. "You can't use the kid as a human shield. Put her down in THWAP." During Bakugou's tirade, Eri had taken the opportunity to hit him in the face with a snowball. Upon seeing the explosion user's snow-covered face, Ochako was finding it difficult to not laugh out loud. The snow quickly melted off Bakugou's face as he gnashed his teeth in anger and rage. "Run," he said through gritted teeth. "Run, Eri, run for the hills," Ochako exclaimed as she placed Eri down and both ran away from Bakugou, who was using his quirk to try and catch up to them. As the two went in opposite directions, Bakugou started chasing after Eri. Upon realizing this, Eri moved her legs as fast as she could. As she continued to make a beeline for a place to hide, Eri was suddenly yanked from behind and pulled into a makeshift wall of snow. She opened her eyes to gaze up at Shoto and Momo's puzzled faces. "And what exactly are you running from, Eri?" Shoto asked with a raised eyebrow. "Kakin," Eri said as she rubbed the back of her head and gave a sheepish smile. "I may have thrown a snowball at his face. That explains a lot," both students thought. "Well then," Momo said with a sigh, "guess we'll have to fix that, huh?" "But how?" Eri asked with curiosity. "Don't worry," Shoto said. we've got a plan, kid. The unmistakable voice of Bakugou called out in anger. Where are you? You can't hide forever. His eyes then fell on the snow wall and a smirk grew on his face. So that's where you're hiding, he said as he made his way over. He was barely 6 feet away from the wall, however, when Shadow and Momo popped up with a snowball in each hand. Another quick glance caused Bakugou to also notice the huge pile of snowballs behind Shadow. Oh, you mother, he began, but was interrupted when his fellow classmates began pelting him with snowballs. While this was going on, Eri handed snowballs to Shadow and Momo as they continued to hurl them at Bakugou. The onslaught continued for a good 5 minutes until the trio ran out of snowballs. Eri glanced over the wall and tried to look for Bakugou, but he was nowhere to be found. Her eyes soon fell on an arm that was sticking out under a pile of snow and was twitching in agitation. Now that he'll have some time to cool off, Momo said as she wiped her hands and looked down at Eri. How about we go look for IzuOcha? She's probably worried sick about you. Okay, Eri said as she took Momo and Shadow's hands. And with that, the trio left to join the others while Bakugou was gritting his teeth in anger under a pile of snow. That kid is gonna be the fucking death of me, he thought as he tried to pull himself out. December 24th. Okay, Eri, just hold still for a few more seconds, IzuOcha said as she worked on the bow in Eri's hair. It was Christmas Eve and Class 1 was hosting a party for themselves, their teachers, and a few others. For the big event, Momo had bought Eri a traditional plaid holiday dress with a red cardigan, black leggings, and shiny black shoes. The dress also came with a hair bow. And we are done, IzuOcha exclaimed as she finished tying the bow. Eri stepped down from the circular stand and twirled a bit, causing the bottom of the dress to sway. You look absolutely beautiful, sweetie, IzuOcha said with a smile. Thanks, Mama, Eri said as she glanced up at IzuOcha. You look pretty too. IzuOcha was wearing green pants with a red turtleneck sweater. She was also wearing a perfume meant to smell like peppermint. IzuOcha planted a kiss on Eri's cheek, causing the little girl to giggle. Now, IzuOcha said as she stood up and extended her hand out to Eri. Let's see if Deku's ready. The little girl nodded and took IzuOcha's hand as the two of them exited the room and made their way downstairs. Soon they came across the second floor and knocked on Midoriya's door. As the door opened to reveal the one for all user, both IzuOcha and Eri's eyes widened at the blue wool All Might sweater he was wearing. Is there anything he owns that isn't All Might themed? Both girls thought in unison. Ready for the party, Eri? Midoriya asked as he glanced down at the little girl, smiling as she nodded vigorously in excitement. He took her free hand and accompanied both her and IzuOcha down to the party. As soon as her gaze was level with the ceiling, Eri's eyes widened in surprise and awe. The living room and kitchen were covered in festive decorations with colored balls and lights hanging from the ceiling. Around the room were electric candles perched on the windowsills while the lights were dimmed to give an aura of calmness and tranquility. The Christmas tree was fully decorated and lit up, adding to the festive ambience. There were even tables with a wide variety of food and sweets. As soon as she was visible for all to see, many of the girls and some of the boys crowded around Eri and commented on how beautiful and adorable she looked in her dress. Momo was particularly pleased that Eri liked it, considering it was her personal favorite as well. Hey Eri, Satsuki called out among the crowd. Hey Satsuki, Eri said as she ran to her best friend. Satsuki was wearing the exact same dress Eri had on, except that hers was green. She also had a green bow tied up in her hair. You look lovely in that dress. Eri turned around to see a gangly man with a sunken face and blonde hair sticking out in all directions. He smiled as her own eyes and smile widened. Grandpa Might, Eri exclaimed as she ran to the former pro hero. You hoping Santa will give you lots of presents tomorrow morning? All Might asked as he knelt down and pet the top of Eri's head. Eri nodded vigorously as All Might chuckled a bit. Meanwhile, at the walkway that connected the kitchen and the living room, IzuOcha and Midoriya couldn't help but smile as they saw Eri talking to All Might. She seemed so happy being surrounded by things that she hadn't seen in years and people who cared about her. Slowly but surely, they knew she was on the path to a full recovery. Hey Ochako, Midoriya, Mina said as she gave a sly smile and pointed upward. Take a look above you. It only took half a millisecond for both IzuOcha and Midoriya to look up before their faces turned an equal shade of pink. Hanging right in between them was a stem of mistletoe. Their faces soon lowered as they stared at each other and sweat began to pour out of their faces like waterfalls. Some of the other students began to crowd with looks of either anticipation or sly grins on their faces. As the seconds ticked by, neither IzuOcha nor Midoriya moved a muscle out of fear until, I just remembered, Midoriya exclaimed. Gotta go check on the ham. And I gotta see if we have enough and napkins, Ochako said quickly, and with that, both students ran off at breakneck speed. Those who stuck around to see the show left the scene either mumbling words of disappointment or groaning. Mina, however, was beside herself. Are you kidding me? She cried out in frustration. IFRICKIN gift wrapped that for them. Just then, there was a knock at the front door. Calming down, Mina casually walked over and opened it to greet the newcomers. "So glad you guys could make it. She'll be so excited to see you again." "Eri," she called out. "Look who's here." Eri, meanwhile, was talking to her grandpa when she heard Mina call out her name. Confused, she turned around to see Mina along with the new guests. Eri's eyes widened with happiness as she recognized the newcomers. "Uncle Mirio, Uncle Tamaki, Auntie Neji," she cried out as she ran toward UAS Big 3. Mirio Tagata gave his signature smile as he leaned forward and picked Eri up. He then playfully tossed her into the air before catching her and holding her in his arms. "Merry Christmas, Eri," he exclaimed in his boisterous voice. Tamaki Amajiki only responded with a mere hi while Nejire Hado greeted Eri with a Merry Christmas and a kiss on her right cheek. With Tagata still carrying Eri, the big three made their way towards their fellow interns. Amajiki met up with KiriMina, who was more than thrilled to see him. Tagata and Hado made their way toward the opposite end of the room where they saw Midoriya, IzuOcha. The two students' heads perked up at the sound of their names being called out. They turned and immediately smiled as they saw their upperclassmen heading their way. "Tagata, Hado," they called out as they walked toward them. "Glad to see you two are doing well," Hado said cheerfully as she pulled IzuOcha into a tight embrace. "We're just so glad you three could make it," Midoriya said excitedly. "As if we would miss out on seeing this little one," Mirio said as he playfully tickled Eri, causing her to giggle. He then placed her down, which prompted her to run and find Satsuki. "She seems to be enjoying herself," Hado chimed in as she, Tagata, Midoriya, and IzuOcha watched the little girl lead. Midoriya and IzuOcha both nodded in agreement as they watched Eri fondly. But in all seriousness, Tagata said as he placed a hand on Midoriya's shoulder while Hado did the same towards IzuOcha, "We're both very proud of you for doing this for her. She seems to be enjoying her life with you and the rest of your class. There are times where it's been hard," Midoriya said, "but in the end, it's worth it." "I can imagine," Tagata said simply. "And if you were here to see how happy she is now, I'm sure that Sir Night Eye would also be very proud of you, Midoriya." Midoriya only nodded in response. Meanwhile, Eri and Satsuki were shuffling stealthily with their backs pressed up against the wall. Their target, chocolate chip cookies on the dessert table. "Are you sure we won't get caught, Eri?" Satsuki asked. "Of course we won't," Eri said with confidence. "Everyone's distracted. We just need to get to the table and we're home free." With the matter settled, both girls moved through the crowd with cat-like reflexes until they had reached their destination. Both pairs of eyes widened in anticipation as Eri reached for the chocolatey morsels. "Don't even think about having one of those till after dinner, young lady." IzuOcha's call caused Eri to retract her hand back and swivel her head to try and find her mom. She soon found her talking to Hado casually as if nothing had happened. How did she even know? She thought in confusion. Both Eri and Satsuki sighed in defeat as they walked away from the dessert table. "Psst, Eri," a voice whispered out to her. Both girls turned to see All Might with his back facing them. Their eyes glanced downward and widened as they noticed 2 cookies in his right hand. "Thanks, Grandpa," Eri said happily as she and Satsuki took the cookies and ran off. All Might smiled a bit as he turned to get some more eggnog. He stepped back, however, when he came face to face with Midoriya and IzuOcha, the latter of whom was glaring up at the former pro hero. All Might said nervously as IzuOcha's eyes bore into him. "I read somewhere that it's the job of the grandparent to spoil their grandchild." He then gave a weak and hopeful smile that the excuse would save him from the wrath of IzuOcha's motherly instincts. IzuOcha only sighed in defeat. "Well, since it is Christmas, I guess I can let it slide," she said as All Might sighed in relief and Midoriya rubbed the back of his neck while laughing sheepishly. 30 minutes later, dinner was served. There was a whole plethora of foods: baked ham, roasted potatoes, buttered green beans, stuffing, carrots, squash, cranberry sauce, and buttered rolls. Eri made it a point to try a little of everything, thus helping Midoriya and Ochako to know what dishes she would like in the future. Dinner was mostly quiet until Kaminari and Minda started fighting over the wishbone. When Kaminari came out the victor, the miniature pervert tackled him, claiming that he was robbed of his wish. They only stopped figging when Gyro stabbed Kaminari with her earjacks and Bakugou karate chopped Minda on the head, knocking him out instantly. After dinner was finished, there was a sudden knock on the door. Mina raced over and opened it with a smile on her face. "Hey girl," she said excitedly. "Didn't think you were gonna make it." "Yeah, Power Loader put me on cleaning duty before the holiday break," Hatsum said as she entered the dormitory. "But I'm here and ready to party. Wish up, Class 1A. The rest of the class kindly said hi in return while IzuOcha merely responded with a friendly wave. The only person who wasn't happy with Hatsum being at the party was Eri. She still hadn't gotten over the incident back on Halloween. When Hatsum greeted everyone, Eri didn't greet her back. Instead, she put on an adorable pout and stared daggers at the pink-haired girl. "You're just in time," Midoriya said. "We haven't even gotten to the Christmas cake yet." "Sweet," Hatsum replied happily. "By the way, Midoriya, I have something for you," she added as she walked toward the boy. with speed fast enough to rival Ida. Eri ran from her chair until she was standing right between Midoriya and Hatsum. She then stretched her arms out in a protective stance and glared at the mechanic standing before her. Chuckling, Hatsum looked down at the little girl and said, "I come in peace, kid." "Anyway," she said as she glanced back at Midoriya, "the high-density weights that you ordered were just completed today." "Sweet," Midoriya said as he saw the devices. "I always wanted to use these." "Oh, Ida," Hatsum said as she directed her attention to the class rep. Upon hearing her call his name, Ida immediately stiffened. He still hadn't forgiven Hatsum for the way she used their fight during the sports festival to commercialize her support items. "I'm glad you're here," Hatsum continued, not even noticing the frozen atmosphere Ida gave off by looking at her. "I wanted to tell you that I just completed something for your brother. It should be at his place by tomorrow." At the mention of his brother, Ida's expression changed from annoyance to a mixture of puzzlement and surprise. Thanks," he said, unsure of how to even respond to such a statement. "And I have something for Eri as well." Hatsum handed a bundle to the girl. Eri cautiously took the present, which felt light to the touch. She then looked to IzuOcha for permission to open it. When she responded with a nod, Eri opened the parcel. Her curiosity was further piqued when it was revealed to be a one-piece suit. But what made the suit so unique was the fact that it was green, had a hood with eye holes, and had rabbit-like ears on top. In addition, the design on the body made it look like it was a superhero costume. It almost looked like, "It's a onesie," IzuOcha said as she glanced at the suit. "And from the looks of it, I think it's meant to look like yours, Deku." At this, Midoriya took a second look at the onesie. She was absolutely right. The ears, the design on the body portion, and even the footwear were all similar to his own hero costume. The evidence was clear enough. Hatsum had made Eri a Deku onesie. "Yeah," Hatsum said with a smile. "That took a lot longer to make than the equipment. I've never sewn before and I had to go through 20 suits before I got it right." "What do you say to Hatsum, Eri?" Midoriya asked as the little girl's eyes sparkled with delight at her Christmas present. Eri suddenly stiffened at the fact that she had to thank the girl that always got too up close and personal with her papa. Swallowing her pride and putting personal displeasure aside, Eri turned to look at the mechanic but stared downward as she muttered, "Thank you. I'll take it," Hatsum said with a chuckle. The rest of the party continued when KiriMina brought out the Christmas cake. Eri and Satsuki's eyes widened with excitement at the sight of the cake, which was covered with white frosting and had strawberries cut with frosting in between them on top of it. There was also a little plastic Santa and a plastic Rudolph on top as well. Once the cake had been distributed, Eri ended up with the Santa on top of her slice while Satsuki had Rudolph on hers. After everyone had eaten their piece, Momo noticed that the hands on the clock rested at 8:30 p.m. "How about I read you the night before Christmas before you both go to bed?" she asked Eri and Satsuki. Both girls nodded in excitement. Momo always told the best stories. Momo then situated herself onto the middle of the couch while IzuOcha sat to her right and Tsuyu sat to her left. Then, IzuOcha picked Eri up and sat her on her lap while Tsuyu did the same for Satsuki. Meanwhile, most of Class 1 gathered around the other chairs and pieces of furniture to listen in on the classic story. The only exceptions were Bakugou, who said he didn't want to listen in on some stupid kid's story, and Minta, who was not interested in a story that didn't have centerfolds in the middle. Once everyone was situated, Momo pulled out the book and flipped through the first page. She then cleared her throat and read. "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there." Throughout the entire reading, Eri kept a huge smile on her face while listening intently. She giggled a bit when Momo read the description of Santa. Meanwhile, IzuOcha and Midoriya couldn't help but smile at her adorableness. 20 minutes later, Momo had almost reached the end of the story. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. She paused to glance at Eri and Satsuki, only to find both of them fast asleep with Eri resting her head against IzuOcha's chest and Satsuki resting hers on Tsuyu's. Momo smiled as she resumed the story. "But I heard him exclaim." Eri drove out of sight. "Merry Christmas to all." She paused once again as she closed the book. She then leaned forward and gently kissed Eri on the head before whispering and to all a good night. With the story done, the Christmas party was deemed officially over. Tsuyu left to drop Satsuki back home. The guests left. Class 1 started cleaning up, and Midoriya and IzuOcha put Eri to bed before rejoining their classmate. December 25th. Eri, wake up," IzuOcha said as she desperately tried to shake the little girl awake. Her excited pleas were only met with groans. 5 more minutes, Mama," Eri said grumpily as she pulled her blanket over her head. Seeing her act of resistance, IzuOcha began to ponder how to get Eri out of bed. Maybe the reveal of breakfast will get her up, she thought. But then another strategy popped into her head that made her smirk a bit. It was the same technique that her parents used to get her up on Christmas when she was little. "All right," she said, trying to sound as casual as possible. Then I guess you don't want to open your presents. Almost instantly, Eri sat up in bed with her hair sticking out in all directions. Presents? She asked. She then glanced at the calendar on IzuOcha's wall, and her mouth widened into a smile as she noticed the circle around the number 25. It's Christmas, she excitedly exclaimed. As she made a beeline for the door, she soon felt herself running in place. She then turned back to see IzuOcha grabbing the back of her shirt with just 3 fingers and a smile on her face. How about we take a bath first? The UA student asked as the little girl ceased her running. Okay, Eri said as IzuOcha loosened her grip. IzuOcha then picked up the little girl and gave her a peck on the cheek. And Merry Christmas, sweetie, she said. Eri then kissed her on the cheek as well and said, Merry Christmas, Mama. And with that, the 2 girls went off to the showers to get cleaned up. Afterwards, IzuOcha changed into black pants and a pink sweater while Eri changed into a white shirt with Rudolph on the front, black leggings, and a black skirt. She then took IzuOcha's hand and followed her downstairs. When they reached the ground floor, everyone was there waiting for them to arrive. Upon noticing them, everyone cried out in happiness, with some wishing Eri a Merry Christmas. Midoriya himself greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. He was wearing a green shirt and green pants. Merry Christmas, Eri, KiriMina said as he held a plate of cinnamon pancakes with apple topping on it. I hope you're hungry. Eri's eyes widened at the breakfast she saw before her. The mixed aroma of apple and cinnamon caused her sense of smell to go into overdrive, and she had to summon all of her willpower not to drool in excitement and anticipation. Once she sat down and said itadakimasu, she then proceeded to take a bite out of the delicious breakfast. It felt as though she had entered food nirvana. The pancakes were so light and fluffy and yet not runny. In addition, the amount of cinnamon in each flapjack was just perfect. Not too much for her to cough on and yet not too little for the flavor to be undetectable. As for the apples, they were soft and yet firm enough to chew on, while the sauce was warm and sweet. The combination of the cinnamon in the pancakes and the tartness of the apples was enough to make Eri to close her eyes and smile blissfully from the sensation. I take it you like them? KiriMina asked with a chuckle. They're delicious. Thanks, Uncle Shima, Eri exclaimed delightedly as she took another bite of the delectable morsel. After breakfast, Midoriya and IzuOcha took Eri into the living room, where she gasped with surprise and awe. There were several wrapped gifts of all different shapes and sizes under the Christmas tree, some of which she noticed had her name on them. A sideways glance caused her to see an empty plate and glass and a note where she had left out milk and cookies for Santa. As she opened the letter, it read, Dear Eri, thank you so much for the milk and cookies. They were delicious. I hope you enjoy the gifts I've given you. You do deserve them for being such a good little girl, after all. Merry Christmas, my dear Santa Claus. Eri grinned as she read the letter and showed it to everyone. When she wasn't looking, Midoriya silently fist-bumped Hanta for thinking up the idea of the letter and writing it himself. Once that was finished, Class 1 began opening their presents. ShoMo had given Momo a complete Russian doll collection that she had been eyeing during the holiday season. She bowed repeatedly and thanked him with a face as pink as Mina's skin. Mina, meanwhile, presented KiriMina with a framed picture of Crimson Riot, and KiriMina's eyes widened as he saw a message and autograph from the pro hero himself. The gift resulted in KiriMina unexpectedly kissing Mina in gratitude before realizing what he was doing and pulling back. In turn, Mina tackled him to the ground, causing a few students to wolf whistle and cheer for them, while Midoriya and IzuOcha covered Eri's eyes and ears. IzuOcha gave Midoriya a new notebook for him to use for future battles, which resulted in him crying out waterfalls. After he had calmed down, Midoriya then handed IzuOcha a box of holiday-themed matcha. This resulted in IzuOcha hugging Midoriya. In turn, caused the One for All user to go into a state of shock from being hugged by a girl for the first time in his life. Eri seemed to enjoy gift opening the most out of everyone. She was practically beaming from ear to ear at all the gifts she received, including a collection of books from Momo, a new training gi from Mashurao, an All Might action figure from Midoriya, a framed photo of her, IzuOcha, and Midoriya from IzuOcha, and others. Seeing her smile seemed to put a smile on everyone else's faces as well. The only exception was Bakugou, who glanced away in annoyance. So Eri, IzuOcha said as soon as the gift opening was over, did Santa get you what you asked for? Yep, Eri said simply. What was it? Midoriya asked quizzically. Eri scanned the entire room, looking at the faces of Class 1A, before she glanced up at Midoriya and said, a family. The comment resulted in a collective of DAAWs from the girls and even from a few boys. At around 11 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Oh good, they're here, Eda exclaimed as he made his way to the main doors. He then opened them up to reveal 4 people, 3 women and 1 man, who stood before Class 1 and said, with glittering eyes, rock on. With cat paws, we're here to help. Out of nowhere, we appear. Cutely catly, we sting. The wild pussycats. There was a sudden silence in the room as the students and Eri stared at the 4 adults posing ridiculously in front of them. As Eri looked out from behind Midoriya's legs, she could see that they were a unique group. They all seemed to be in their 30s with various personalities. The woman with the burgundy red hair seemed to be the calmest and gentlest out of all of them. The woman with turquoise hair seemed to be the polar opposite, being all hyperactive through her body language. The blonde woman seemed to be hyperactive as well, but was very loud and didn't seem to care how she came off to others. And the soul male looked very strict and intimidating. "Hey there," Midoriya finally said. "Glad you all could make it. Well, it has been a while since we last met," the woman with the burgundy red hair said as the quartet got out of their poses. "And when Eraserhead and Ida invited us, we couldn't resist the offer. Oh, by the way," IzuOcha said, "we have a new resident." Midoriya then moved aside so that Eri was in full view of the pro-heroes. "Guys," IzuOcha said as she knelt down beside the little girl, "this is Eri." "Oh my god, you are so cute," the blonde and turquoise-haired women exclaimed as they rushed forward up close to Eri's face. The sudden exclamations and invasion of personal space caused Eri to suddenly hug IzuOcha in fear. "It's all right," a soft voice said as Eri felt a warm hand on her head. She opened her eyes to see the burgundy red-haired woman looking down at her with a gentle smile. "They won't hurt you, they're just energetic," she added with a sweat drop. "So you're the little girl IzuOcha told us about." At this, Eri merely nodded her head. "Then allow us to introduce ourselves," the woman said as she rejoined the others. Soon, they made their introductions and struck out poses while stating them. "I'm Sasaki Shino, known by many as the pro-hero Mandalay and leader of the Wild Pussycats," the burgundy red-haired woman exclaimed. "Name's Tsuchikawa Ryuko, aka Pixie Bob," the blonde said loudly. "Chadora Yawara, but you shall refer to me ... as Tiger," the male exclaimed in a deep and macho voice. "And my name is Shirotoko Tomoko, formerly known as the hero Ragdoll," the turquoise-haired girl said while waving her hands up and down excitedly with her fingers curled up to look like cat paws. "And we are ... the Wild Pussycats," all four shouted in unison as they each struck a final pose. "It's nice to meet you all," Eri said as she smiled at the four adults. "Oh, by the way, Midoriya," Sasaki said, "there's someone who's wanted to see you for a while. Aunt Sasaki, come on." The sound of a small boy's pleading voice caused Eri to look around in surprise and confusion. Sasaki and the others stepped aside to reveal a small boy who looked to be slightly younger than Eri. He wore a scowl on his face as he glanced upward at the One for All user. His most notable feature was a red hat on his head with two pointy gold horns on it. "Kauta," Midoriya said excitedly as he walked up to the boy and vigorously shook his hand. "How have you been? It's been a while, huh? Why?" "Yeah," the boy said as a small blush grew on his face. Upon seeing the blush, Eri couldn't help but giggle to herself. "Kauta," Sasaki said as she placed a hand on Kauta's back. "There's someone you should meet." She then walked Kauta over to where Eri was standing. "Eri, this is Kauta Izumi. He's my nephew," she said before she directed her attention back to the boy and continuing. "Kauta, this is Eri. She's living with Midoriya and the rest of Class 1A. Kauta's cheeks turned a bright pink as he looked at the girl before him. He had never really had any interactions with a girl his own age, and seeing one caused him to shake a bit out of nervousness. When she smiled at him, he felt something warm and tingly growing inside. "Hi, Kauta. Nice to meet you," Eri said sweetly, causing Kauta to stiffen a bit. "And nice to meet you too," he said nervously. "So," Eri said, "how do you know Papa?" When Kauta didn't give any sudden response to Eri calling Midoriya Papa, Sasaki whispered to Izuku and IzuOcha, "Aizawa explained everything to us, even the fact that she calls you to her mama and papa." "Well," Kauta said, "He and the rest of the students went to our quirk training camp, and during a villain attack, he saved me." "And you?" "Me too," Eri said. "He and Mama saved me from some villains. So I guess we're the same, huh?" Why, yeah," Kauta said nervously. "Isn't there something you'd like to give her, Kauta?" Sasaki asked with a small smile. Kauta suddenly remembered. Sasaki had insisted that he give Eri a present when they visited as a sign of friendship. Kauta then reached into his pocket and pulled out a very small, rectangular object covered in gift wrap. He stood frozen in place as he looked at the girl standing before him, who was staring back in confusion. "Go on, Kauta, give Eri her gift," Sasaki said gently as she gave him a little push forward. Gulping, Kauta's expression hardened as he gave in to his aunt's demands. "Here," he said as he stuck out the small present and glanced away from Eri. Eri took the little gift and opened it gently. It turned out to be a colorful, thick piece of paper with All Might on it. "It's a trading card," Kauta said. "You collect them and trade them with other people for more." As Eri flipped it over, she saw writing that mentioned her grandpa's stats, history, and certain fun facts. "This is ... for me?" she asked. "Yeah." "Well," Kauta said as his body shifted sideways and his tough guy persona came back. "I've got about 2 of those back home, so I figured it wouldn't hurt if I gave one away." He didn't get the chance to finish his sentence, as Eri had taken the opportunity to plant a kiss on his left cheek, causing Kauta's face to turn a violent shade of Valentine red. He swiveled his head with wide eyes to see Eri give him a small smile as she said thanks, Kauta. The children failed to notice the mixed reactions from the pussycats and the students in response to the sweet gesture. A majority of the students were either fangirling silently or looking on in shock at how bold Eri had been. Even Midoriya and IzuOcha were surprised at Eri's actions. Taking all bets, Mina whispered in excitement. Taking all bets for how many years it'll be before these two start dating. Who wants to bet on this? Immediately, various boys and girls started whispering bets and handing money to her. 11,386 yen on 5 years, 17,080 on 6 years, 34,160 on. Guys, all the other students turned to see Midoriya and IzuOcha looking both flustered and slightly agitated. You shouldn't be making bets on when they'll end up dating, Midoriya said. Exactly, IzuOcha said in agreement. And besides, they're just kids. We shouldn't try to bet on their whole future and the relationship they could have with each other. 56,934 yen on 9 years. Both Midoriya and IzuOcha's eyes widened in shock when they saw Sasaki handing a wad of cash to Mina, who jotted it down in her notebook. What? She asked as she looked at the two students' faces. I want great nieces and nephews. Kauta, meanwhile, was about to say something in protest toward his aunt when he suddenly felt a sudden aura of menace from behind. Turning around, he soon lost all color in his face as he stared up at the glaring faces of Bakugou and KiriMina, both of whom had activated their quirks in a threatening manner. Listen up, brat, Bakugou said through gritted teeth. You so much as try anything with her, and you'll be in for a world of hurt. Snatch. Or, Tsuchikawa said with a hand on Bakugou's face and a venomous glare on her own. You'd might have your face crushed if you so much as lay a hand on Kauta. Which is it, punk? She asked as she began to tighten her grip. Hiroshima wasn't faring any better. Mina had taken it upon herself to grab a hold of his right ear and scold him for his actions. Kauta was at a loss for words as he witnessed the chaos in front of him. Eri, on the other hand, couldn't help but giggle a bit as she looked at Kauta and smiled. Nervously, Kauta smiled back. After everyone had calmed down and any injuries were prevented, the rest of the day went off without a hitch. The Pussycats joined Class 1A for a pleasant afternoon luncheon of sandwiches and tea. Eri sat between Midoriya and Kauta, to whom she talked about her school, her friends, and what it was like to live with Class 1A. The conversation then turned to Kauta talking about the training camp that his aunt and the others presided over. Eri was fascinated by the fact that it was so far out in the woods, seeing as how she had been cooped up for years in a cold, dark room. Soon, however, it was time for the Pussycats to leave. As they were about to head out, Sasaki gave Eri a card that had her contact information, should she ever need help or just want to talk with Kauta. The altercation caused Kauta to lower his hat in embarrassment and Eri to giggle. So, sweetie, Midoriya said when the Pussycats and Kauta left, did you have fun today? Yes, Papa, I did, Eri said with a smile. It was then that her eyes widened as she suddenly remembered something. Wait here, I'll be right back. And with that, she sped off upstairs, leaving a confused Midoriya and IzuOcha in her wake. After a few minutes, Eri came back down with a present in each hand. Merry Christmas, Papa. Merry Christmas and Happy Birthday, Mama, the little girl said as she handed the gifts to the two students. Aw, thanks, sweet pea, IzuOcha said with a smile as she and Midoriya took the gifts. As soon as they ripped off the wrapping paper, their eyes widened in surprise by what they each saw. Midoriya and IzuOcha each held a watercolor painting encased in a picture frame, which Midoriya recognized as ones that his mother owned. But it was the painting itself that caused both students to be at a loss for words. The painting consisted of a field with little tufts of grass, a sun, a few mountains in the background, and in the center of the painting were what looked like Midoriya, Eri, and IzuOcha, all holding hands and smiling. A glance down at the bottom of the painting showed two words written in black marker that read, My parents. I wanted to give you both a gift, Eri said. I made them in class before Christmas break, and when I met Grandma, I asked her if she had anything I could poo. She stopped, however, when she noticed that both Midoriya and IzuOcha were looking downward and shaking. Mama, Papa, she asked with concern. What's wrong? You don't like it? It's beautiful, sweetheart, IzuOcha said as she looked up at Eri with tears of happiness in her eyes. This is perhaps the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. Then why are you and Papa crying? Eri asked in confusion. Well, Eri, Midoriya said as he too looked up with tears in his eyes. I guess it's because seeing these pictures made us remember just how lucky we are to have you in our lives, and how great these past few months have been taking care of you. We love you so much, sweetie, and thank you so much for the thoughtful gifts, IzuOcha said as she and Midoriya pulled Eri in for a group hug. As they continued their embrace, both students looked at each other and smiled in silent agreement. This was, without a doubt, the best Christmas either one of them ever had. Bonus content. December 28. 4 days had passed since Mei Hatsum had attended Class 1A's Christmas party. On this particular day, she was currently working on special tech for one of the teachers. turning off her welding torch. She lifted her goggles from her eyes and wiped the sweat off her brow. As she took a swig from her water bottle and leaned back in her chair, she closed her eyes and remembered the fun she had that night with Class 1A. She thoroughly enjoyed spending time with her peers that evening, even if a certain little girl still held a grudge toward her. A little smile grew on her face as she hoped that one day, Eri could trust her and enjoy her company. Hatsume's thoughts were interrupted, however, when she heard a knock at the classroom door. Propping her chair back down, she walked over and opened it to reveal a certain male student with glasses and black hair standing before her. "Ada," she exclaimed, "long time no see. Did you come to help me test my babies?" "No, Hatsume," Ada said simply. It might have been Hatsume's imagination, but Ada looked more rigid than usual, and there was a slight blush on his cheeks. I came to say thanks. Rather, my brother wished to say thanks, so I take it that he liked his gift," Hatsume asked with a smile. "Indeed," Ida said as he tried to maintain his composure. "In fact, my entire family was surprised by the ... What was the devices called again?" he asked sheepishly. "The mobility grips," Hatsume said with pride. "Devices used to help develop movement for people who have been paralyzed. Just attach some needles into the nervous system, think the command, and move those limbs." Even when there isn't a crowd, she still feels the need to advertise her devices. Ida thought, "Yes, well, I'm sure this will help show you how he felt about them," he said as he pulled out his phone and pressed the play button on a video. It showed Tensei in his wheelchair wearing what looked like metal gears and poles on his right leg and foot. May couldn't help but smile a bit as she watched Tensei's eyes widen as he slowly raised his right leg. She could also faintly hear the sounds of what looked like a woman sobbing happily as she watched the spectacle before her. "Needless to say," Ida said as he paused the video and pocketed his phone, "my family cannot thank you enough, Hatsume. My brother especially." He was happy to know that there was still the chance he could be a pro hero should the right equipment come along. "Well, to be honest, I wanted to make up for the fact that I used our bout in the sports festival to market my babies," Hatsume said guilty. "And when I heard about what happened to your brother and his condition, I knew it was the opportunity to try and build something that might make things less strenuous for you and your folks." Upon hearing this, Ada smiled a bit. Maybe he had been wrong about her. "Though I take it you're not just here to thank me, are you?" Hatsume asked as she raised an eyebrow and a smirk grew on her face. "No," Ada said as her question brought him back to reality. He then cleared his throat nervously before continuing. "In light of what you have done, I was perhaps hoping to repay you. And no, I will not help you test your babies," he added quickly as he saw Hatsume's eyes light up with excitement. I was wondering perhaps ... if you weren't too busy sometime ... to join me for some coffee ... or something." Hatsume's eyes widened a bit. She had never expected Tenya Ada to offer such a proposal, especially after what had happened between them at the sports festival last fall. "Ada," she said slowly, "are you asking me out ... on a date?" "I wouldn't call it a date," Ada said nervously. "More like a token of appreciation. That is to say, it's all right if you don't." "Sure, I'm sorry," Ada asked in surprise. "Sure, coffee sounds nice," Hatsume said with a smile. "Excellent," Ada said. "I shall notify you soon with a possible date that we could get together." "Good day, Hatsume," he added as he walked away. "See ya, Ada," Hatsume called out. As she closed the door, she couldn't help but smile a bit as she closed her eyes and thought, next year's going to be pretty interesting. "Come on, Eri, concentrate. You can do it, sweetie. Just focus." And Eri grunted as she scrunched her face in concentration as she held the hand of the injured student. A bright aura of white light seemed to surround the area of the student's injury. The aura only lasted for a few seconds, however, as the light surrounding Eri's horn died. The little girl sighed in defeat as she saw that she made very little progress. She, Midoriya, IzuOcha were in the infirmary with Aizawa and Recovery Girl when Midoriya was offered the opportunity to look after Eri. He was also informed that she would have to partake in quirk training. Due to the fact that her quirk was so unique and could be used as support, it was determined that Recovery Girl would be the one to train her, with Midoriya and another student for support. Initially, the other student was meant to be Mirio, but when he noticed the connection Eri shared with IzuOcha, he stepped down and allowed the gravity user to take his place. Nezu even assigned Aizawa to the training exercises, seeing as how he was the only one who could nullify Eri's quirk should anything go wrong. There was one problem, however. No matter how hard she tried, Eri couldn't seem to fully use her quirk for more than 5 seconds, and even then, it had no lasting effects. For the first month of training, the two teachers and students didn't see this as a problem since she had used up a lot of power during the rescue mission. However, by the second month, things got complicated. According to Aizawa, the power level of her quirk should have been enough to heal small wounds completely regardless of the state of her horn. Even IzuOcha and Midoriya had to admit that they were both a little worried that Eri would never know how to use her quirk properly. You're all set to leave, Aizawa said to the student as soon as she was healed by one of Recovery Girl's kisses. The student only nodded as she left the infirmary. I'm sorry, Eri muttered dejectedly as she glancing downward. It's all right, sweetie, Recovery Girl said as she placed a hand on the little girl's shoulder and gave her a small smile. We just need to find out something to help amplify your quirk. That's all. She then turned to Midoriya and IzuOcha and asked, you two wouldn't know anything that might help her, would you? We've tried almost everything, IzuOcha said sadly. Persuasion, encouraging her to be calm, concentration, none of which work. As IzuOcha, Recovery Girl, and Aizawa talked, Midoriya drowned them out and closed his eyes as he tried to think back to when he faced off against Overhaul. There had to be something off during that fight that might help them here and now. As his mind raced throughout the fight, he suddenly remembered something about Eri and her quirk. What if we've been looking at this whole thing the wrong way? Midoriya asked. He then turned his head to see the 4 sets of eyes staring back at him with confusion. During my fight with Overhaul, I called Eri's quirk a blessing and she seemed happy by it. When she fused her quirk with mine, there were almost no repercussions since she seemed to have control of her quirk. But every time I got injured, she must have felt guilty thinking that she caused me to be in pain. So much so that by the time Overhaul was put down, Eri lost control of her quirk. Is this true, sweetie? IzuOcha asked as she glanced down at the little girl. Were you feeling guilty thinking that you were hurting Papa? Why yes, Eri admitted shamefully. What exactly are you getting at, Midoriya? Recovery Girl asked curiously. What if her quirk is amplified by her emotions? Midoriya explained as the 4 people surrounding him looked on in confusion. I know it seems a little bit ridiculous and a bit far-fetched, but what if it were actually based on that? What if negative emotions caused her to have little to no control over her quirk while positive emotions caused her to not only have better control over it, but also make her quirk stronger? What do you think, Eraser? Recovery Girl asked as she looked up at the homeroom teacher. At this point, might as well test that theory, Aizawa said with a shrug. All right then, Midoriya, Recovery Girl said as she directed her attention toward the boy. We'll try it out. However, I'm not sure what would cause Eri to become happy or be positive. I may have an idea on that part. IzuOcha chimed in before looking at the little girl and saying, Eri, try thinking of some happy memories and use them while also concentrating on the person's injury. Think you can do that? I'll try, Eri said nervously. Very well, then, Recovery Girl said with a smile. I'll call the next patient while you think of something that makes you happy. As Recovery Girl made her way to the door to the infirmary, Eri shut her eyes in concentration. She had to think of a really happy memory in order to make sure that Midoriya's theory was correct. The problem was that there were so few to choose from. Seeing as how she had spent most of her life trapped in a darkened place, she only could think of the times she was with her mama and papa and the rest of class 1. Christmas, her birthday, Halloween... So many memories flooded her mind. Suddenly, she remembered one good memory that probably stood out from all the rest. Are you ready? Recovery Girl asked as her voice snapped Eri from her thoughts. She then opened her eyes to see another student. This time a male, lying on the cot with a purple bruise on his arm. Trying her best to focus on the memory, Eri nodded silently. Very well then, Recovery Girl said, let's begin. As Eri placed her hands gently on the student's arm, she closed her eyes and tried to focus on both the memory and the will to use her quirk. As she tried to concentrate, she felt a surge of power on top of her head where her horn was located. The surge felt odd. In the past, it felt cold and empty. This time, however, it felt warm and comforting, like being wrapped in a cozy blanket or receiving a hug from her parents. Since her eyes were closed, Eri couldn't see the look of awe and amusement on her mama and papa's faces. Even Aizawa's eyes widened slightly at the sight before him. Not only did the aura emitted by Eri last longer than a few seconds, but it also covered the entire body of the injured student as well in the familiar bright aura. Recovery Girl could only smile as the small bruise on the student's leg slowly changed from purple to its original color. Once she had felt that the wound had healed properly, she turned to Eri and said, Eri, that's enough. Concentrate on relaxing. Hearing the elderly woman's words, Eri mentally shook the memory away and breathed deeply so as to relax. Soon, the warm feeling from the surge of power died down. Eri opened her eyes to see the smiling faces of IzuOcha, Midoriya, and Recovery Girl and asked, what happened? See for yourself, Recovery Girl said as she pointed at the student's leg. Eri glanced over and her eyes widened as she noticed that the bruise was gone. You did that, dear? Guess Midoriya's theory turned out to be right after all. Eri couldn't believe it. After all those months of hardship, she was finally able to amplify and gain some control of her quirk. Can we try another? She asked with a huge smile on her face. Please, 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 please. I think that's enough for today, Recovery Girl said with a chuckle. The main focus of today was just trying to find anything that could help you gain some control of your quirk. Now that we know what it is, the real training can begin. And as for you two, she added as she glanced up at both IzuOcha and Midoriya, now that we know what actually works, it'll be the job of you two and your classmates to give her some happy memories in order to help her with her quirk. I don't think that'll be a problem, recovery girl, Midoriya said with a smile, to which she returned, well, thanks again, recovery girl. He added as he and IzuOcha each took Eri by the hand and followed Aizawa to the doors of the infirmary. As she watched them leave, recovery girl couldn't help but smile warmly. That little girl is truly something, she thought in amusement. She's lucky to be around so many people who love and care about her. Eri, meanwhile, continued to walk with IzuOcha, Midoriya, and Aizawa down the halls until they reached the staff lounge. Well, I better get back to work, Aizawa said unenthusiastically. Just be sure you two get your assignments done for Mon. Yo, Eraser, what's up? The sound of a feminine voice caused Aizawa to suddenly stiffen in fear. Sighing in annoyance, he, along with IzuOcha, Midoriya, and Eri, turned to see a young woman in her late 20s with green hair that was covered by an orange bandana. She was wearing baggy green and orange pinstriped shorts, a sleeveless black top, a waistband adorned with smiley face pins, and had orange combat gloves with metal plates around the wrists on her hands. What was most notable about her was the huge smile she had on her face as she approached. Oh God, Aizawa thought tiredly. My greatest nuisance. Ms. Joke, Midoriya exclaimed excitedly as the pro hero stopped right in front of them. What are you doing here? Present Mike, Ms. Joke said simply. He needed some advice on how to deal with the provisional license exam for the new second year's new semester. So how have you two been? Eraser's not giving you a hard time, is he? We've actually been doing well, IzuOcha said with a smile. I've been able to last a few minutes longer without losing my lunch, and Deku's gotten stronger in his fighting abilities. Good to hear, Ms. Joke said before she glanced down at Eri. And who is this? She asked. This is Eri, Midoriya said. She's been living with us and the rest of Class 1A. We just got back from quirk training for her. He then knelt down and said, go on Eri, say hi. Hi, Eri stated nervously. Nice to meet you, kid, Ms. Joke exclaimed. Name's Fukukato Emi, otherwise known as the pro hero Ms. Joke. My quirk allows my targets to break out into uncontrollable laughter. It thus causes me to. As Ms. Joke continued to explain her quirk, Eri looked from her to Aizawa and then back again. Ms. Joke, she asked abruptly, how do you know Mr. Zawa? Oh, Ms. Joke said in surprise before her smile grew. I used to work at an office near his and we become close to one another. She then paused as her eyes turned a dreamy gaze and her cheeks turned a rosy pink. You might say we were meant to be star-crossed. We never were and never will be, Aizawa said in annoyance. God, I miss that sense of humor of yours, Ms. Joke exclaimed as she reverted back to her normal self. Oh, Eri said simply. After a few seconds, she then asked, are you two a couple? Her question received mixed reactions from the four people around her. Aizawa stiffened more at her words, while Midoriya and IzuOcha were torn between worrying about what Aizawa might say and laughing out loud at Eri's question. Ms. Joke, on the other hand, was beside herself. She laughed as she clutched her stomach and tears ran down her face. Man, I like this kid already. It took her a good minute before she calmed down and wiped the tears from her eyes. Unfortunately not, kid, she said casually. I've tried to ask him out, but he still plays hard to get. Speaking of which, she added as she turned her attention toward Aizawa. What do you say, Eraser? How about a date for the kid's sake? No, see what I mean? Ms. Joke said as she laughed once again. So what kind of quirk training were you doing? She then asked Eri. Oh, I was with Recovery Girl with healing people, Eri said simply before her face saddened a bit. I know it's not a really strong or cool quirk like Papa's or Mama's, but before she could finish her sentence, however, Eri felt a gloved hand on top of her head. She glanced slightly upward to see Ms. Joke crouching down and smiling warmly at her. Listen, Ms. Joke said softly. I know that healing may not be the strongest quirk ever, but it still helps people feel better and get better. And personally, I think it's a pretty awesome quirk to have. And you want to know something else? She asked, her smile widening as Eri leaned in with anticipation. I know that no matter what you end up doing with your quirk, you're gonna be a great hero to somebody. Eri couldn't help but smile at the woman's kind words as she nodded her head in appreciation. Welp, I better get going, Ms. Joke said as she stood up and looked at her phone. The meeting's gonna start soon. See you kids later. Bye, IzuOcha and Midoriya said while Eri waved and said bye, Ms. Joke. See ya, Eraser, Ms. Joke said as she walked down the hall. Don't forget about our date. There's no date, Aizawa said. Such a kidder, the laughter user exclaimed as she walked out of sight. Aizawa sighed before saying, I swear someone put her on this earth to punish me for something I did when I was younger. And like her, Eri said simply as she smiled. When Aizawa shot a glare at her, Midoriya and IzuOcha panicked. SOWLC Amende, by Mr. Aizawa. They both exclaimed loudly as they ran off with Eri in tow. Once they made sure they were safe, both students knelt down to catch their breaths. "Maybe, sweetie," Midoriya said while breathing slowly. "It'll be best not to talk about relationships with Mr. Aizawa." "Okay, sorry, Papa," Eri said. "It's all right, sweetie," IzuOcha said as she and Midoriya caught their breaths and stood. "By the way, can we ask you something?" "What?" Eri asked curiously. "What memory did you use to amplify your quirk?" Eri only smiled at the question and said, "Oh it was the day when I started living with you and Papa." Midoriya and IzuOcha could only smile at the little girl's response and, taking a hand each, lead the little girl back to Alliance Heights. "Why can't I see Mama?" Eri asked in concern. She, Midoriya, and Hagakure were standing outside IzuOcha's door, which was closed. "Because she's not feeling well and doesn't want anyone to get sick, sweetie," Hagakure said. Almost on cue, a loud sneeze echoed from the opposite side of the door. "IzuOcha's sick?" Midoriya asked in a worried tone. "Do we call recovery girl? What if it's the flu and it's serious? Maybe I could contact Ida." "No, that wouldn't work since he's off having coffee with Hatsume. Maybe there's some sort of medicine we can use to help her illness go down." "Let me think. We have flu medicine, painkillers, cough medicine." "Papa," Eri exclaimed, "you're doing that thing again." Sorry," Midoriya said, scratching the back of his head, force of habit. "I wouldn't worry too much, Midoriya," Hagakure said. "She said it's just a slight fever. It should be gone within a few days." "Well, that's a relief," Midoriya said with a sigh. With that, he and Hagakure left IzuOcha's door. Eri, however, had stayed behind and continued to stand outside the door. After a few minutes, Momo came by and stopped when she noticed Eri. "Eri," she asked in concern, "is everything okay?" "Oh, everything's fine, Auntie Momo. It's just," Eri paused and her features saddened, "I just wish there was a way for me to help Mama get better." Momo placed a finger underneath her lower lip and she thought about Eri's predicament. Suddenly, an idea popped into her head and a smile grew on her face. "Why not make her a get-well card?" she said. "A get-well card?" Eri asked in confusion. Chuckling a little at Eri's innocence, Momo explained, "It's a card you give to someone wishing them the best when they're either sick or recovering from something. You can either buy them at the store or you can make one yourself." She then leaned in and whispered, "Personally, I find that homemade cards are the best to give. It shows that you care deeply about that person and that you wish them well." "Oh," Eri said in understanding. Just then, an idea popped into her head and she grinned. "Thanks, Auntie Momo," Eri said before she ran off downstairs. Momo only smiled back and waved back. Eri ran to Midoriya's room, where she grabbed construction paper, markers, colored pencils, and other craft tools. She then carefully carried them down to the main floor into the living room, where she set the supplies down on the coffee table. Taking up a sheet of cardboard paper in one hand and a marker in the other, Eri began to work. "What are you working on, Eri?" Midoriya's voice called out from the kitchen. "I'm making Mama a get-well card," Eri said, glancing over at Midoriya. It was then that she noticed him standing over the kitchen stove looking into a pot and stirring something with a wooden spoon. "What are you doing, Papa?" she asked. "Well," Midoriya said with a small smile, "I'm making some zosui. It's got chicken, mushrooms, some vegetables, noodles, and a few spices. It's supposed to help you when you're sick." "Really?" Eri stopped what she was doing and walked over to the kitchen. She then brought up a stepping stool to stand on until her head stood over the countertop. "Yep," Midoriya said. "I'm actually using a recipe that my mom used to make whenever I was sick. Grandma would make that for you." Eri pointed at the black pot. Midoriya stiffened for a second. He had almost forgotten that Eri kept calling his mother Grandma. "Why yes," Midoriya stuttered. "I always remember how good it tasted and it always filled me up and made me feel warm inside." He paused and he used the wooden spoon to scoop up a sliver of broth. He then sipped and tasted it with a quizzical look on his face. "Maybe it needs a few more minutes." "Here," he added, and he scooped another sliver before placing a hand under the spoon, blowing it, and lowering it to Eri's level. "What do you think?" Eri leaned forward and pressed her lips to the tip of the spoon before she sipped it. It was warm and tasted really good. Grandma was without a doubt a great cook. "Another few minutes, Papa," she said, to which Midoriya nodded in agreement. While Midoriya finished the soup, Eri returned to making her get-well card. She used a variety of markers to write out a message and even used her safety scissors to cut a sheet of pink construction paper. She then folded the main paper neatly to complete the project. "Ready to go see Mama?" Midoriya asked. He then picked up a tray with the bowl of soup on it. "Wait," a voice cried out before Eri could respond. The two of them turned to see Mina standing before them holding up 2 sheets of fabric with strings attached to each end. "Gotta put these on before you see her." "Oh, right," Midoriya said. He then set the tray on the counter and placed the piece over his mouth and nose and the strings over his ears. He then knelt down and placed the other fabric over Eri's mouth and nose as well. "What is this?" Eri asked, noticing that her voice was muffled through the fabric. "It's a surgical mask," Mina said. "It helps prevent the spread of diseases so that you don't get sick." Eri nodded in understanding. Now you can go visit Mama, Mina added with enthusiasm. Once Midoriya lifted the tray again, the three of them made their way up the stairs until they reached IzuOcha's door on the 4th floor. Mina then knocked and called out, "IzuOcha, are you still in there?" A groan came from inside, followed by a weak "yeah." Taking it as an invitation to enter, Mina opened the door. There were tissues that littered the floor and some that filled the clear trash can. The covers on the bed were ruffled, and there was a noticeable bundle under it that stretched to both ends of the bed. The bundle underneath tossed the cover over to reveal a pale-faced IzuOcha with a red nose and droopy eyes. "Afternoon, sunshine," Mina said. IzuOcha replied with another groan. "I've brought Midoriya and Eri with me." IzuOcha's red eyes then turned to face Midoriya and Eri. Her gaze softened and her mouth curved into a small smile. "Hey, you two," she said weakly and in a croaky voice. "Hey, IzuOcha," Midoriya said. He made his way over with the tray in his hands. "I made you some soup." He handed her the tray. When the tray was placed on IzuOcha's lap, the steam that emitted from the bowl reached her nostrils. She inhaled deeply and smiled a little. "Thanks, Deku," she said. "It smells really good." Midoriya could only blush at her comment. "Here, Mama," Eri said. She handed IzuOcha the folded piece of paper. "I made this for you." IzuOcha took the card and noticed a little cutout heart glued onto the front of it, giving a small smile. She then opened the card to see a message with words written in different colors. It read, "I hope you get well soon, Mama. Love you, Eri." "Thank you, Eri," IzuOcha said. She looked down at the little girl with a smile. "This is so sweet of you." Eri smiled upon hearing her comment. "Maybe we ought to leave her be," Mina suggested. Eri and Midoriya nodded. They figured IzuOcha would like to enjoy her soup in peace and not run the risk of making them sick as well. With that, Eri, Midoriya, and Mina left the room. When the three of them reached the main floor, Eri began picking up her craft materials to put them away. At that moment, the front doors opened to reveal a certain boy who wore glasses. "Welcome back, Uncle Tenya," Eri said. "Hi, Ida," Midoriya said upon seeing his best friend. "How was coffee with Hatsune?" "Very well, thank you for asking," Ida said. He then took off his coat and placed it on the coat rack. "We discussed what we wanted to do when we graduated UA. I told her about my family's history as heroes. She told me about some of her inventions, and the rest was just small talk. So I take it the date was a success, huh?" Mina asked with a smirk, which caused Ida's cheeks to turn bright pink. It was not a date," Ida exclaimed and gestured wildly. "It was just a casual meeting of two students, one of whom just wanted to show appreciation for what the other had done for him." "Yeah," Mina's eyes narrowed and her smirk grew. "That kiss imprint on your left cheek says otherwise." Upon hearing Mina's words, Ida's cheeks reddened and he ran to try and find a mirror. Midoriya and Eri, meanwhile, both had to cover a hand over their mouths to stifle their laughter while Mina looked on with an amused smile. Bonus content. Eri rose up from her bed in frustration. She couldn't seem to fall asleep. It had been a week since her mama had recovered from her illness and everything seemed to be back to normal. She was still doing well in school. She still hung out with Satsuki, and the other students still treated her like family. It was while she was thinking about the students that her mind shifted to her mama and papa. She never thought about it in the past, but lately she had been noticing some weird things about how they reacted to each other. When one of them would make an encouraging or kind comment, the other would blush and become nervous. Whenever Auntie Mina would make some comment to them with a smirk on her face, they would both blush bright red. And whenever physical contact was made between the two of them, one of them would look like they would pass out. There was something going on between her parents, but Eri couldn't quite put her finger on it. It was then that Eri remembered hearing a word called love from a conversation she overheard between Auntie Gyro and Auntie Momo, which had something to do with Uncle Shadow. When Auntie Momo talked about him, her face turned red and she started to sweat a bit. Maybe love is liking someone deeply, but you're afraid to show it, Eri thought. Maybe that's what is going on with Mama and Papa. She then put on a face of determination and stood up on her bed. All right then, she thought, even if it takes me forever to get it done, Mama and Papa will show their love for each other. And I know just the person to ask for help, she concluded, and a smirk grew on her face.